My name is Avery. I'm a 62-year-old housewife. 2 years ago, my husband, who I had been married to for many years, passed away suddenly due to an illness. Now, I live a modest life, managing the inheritance he left me. I have 2 sons, both of whom are married. When my eldest son, Henry, got married, he and his wife offered to live with me. I told them, I appreciate your concern, but I'm still fit and fine on my own. I don't want to be a burden to you newlyweds. But Henry insisted, I can't bear the thought of you being alone. As the eldest son, it's my responsibility to take care of you. Please don't worry about being a nuisance. And so, we ended up living together. Henry's wife, Rhea, is very young, 9 years younger than Henry, only 23. At first, I worried if such a young girl could handle being a wife, but she was the one Henry chose. I found no reason to object to their marriage, so I accepted it. When we decided to live together, I asked Henry, is Rhea okay with living with me? Won't a young girl like her dislike living with an old woman like me? Henry reassured me, saying, it's fine. Rhea is kind. She'll get along with you. Besides, having you around will help us with the housework. He was adamant about us living together. I couldn't find a reason to object after hearing that. Sure, I'm getting on in years, and it's too late to start worrying when something happens. Thinking that it'd be more reassuring than living alone, I gratefully accepted Henry's proposal. After we had been living together for a while, there was a time when I asked Rhea, sorry to ask, but could you bring in the laundry? I'm going out to get groceries for dinner. Up until then, I hadn't often asked her for anything, but that day I had unavoidable errands to run before shopping, so I decided to ask her. However, Rhea retorted, why do I have to do it? I'm busy right now. You should bring it in before you go, shouldn't you? She seemed occupied playing a game on her smartphone. Even before that, she hadn't helped with any household chores, but I chose not to say anything out of consideration. However, seeing her just lying there playing her game that day, I said a bit more firmly, if it's just a game, you can play it later, right? Could you please help out a bit? Rhea, looking annoyed, grumbled, you're always nagging. Whoever's free should do the chores, right? You could bring it in before shopping. You're really annoying. With a glare at me, she went to the balcony to bring in the laundry. I was taken aback by her rudeness, but I thought it wouldn't do any good to say anything more and upset her further, so I left the house as it was. After that day, Rhea began to harass me. Ignoring me became a daily occurrence. When she didn't like the food I cooked, she would say to Henry, I can't eat this. Hey, let's go out and eat. Just the 2 of us. And they would go out to eat, leaving me behind. Henry did try to consider my feelings, saying, think about Mom too. She went through all this trouble to cook. But when Rhea was in a bad mood, all he could do was say, sorry Mom, we're going to eat out today, and follow Rhea's orders. Rhea never did any housework, no matter how much I asked. Instead, she said, you're not working, right? Aren't you ashamed to rely on Henry for everything at your age? It's normal for you to do the chores, isn't it? She acted as if it was completely natural for me to do all the housework. Rhea accused me of not working, but she wasn't working either. She felt superior because she was supporting Henry, who was working. I hadn't told Rhea, but I wasn't unemployed. I had a little income from managing the apartment my husband left me. I also contributed to the household expenses, so I wasn't completely dependent on Henry. But Rhea seemed to think that because I wasn't working outside the home, I didn't have any income, and Henry was footing all the bills. Once, when I was cleaning, Rhea shouted at me, can't you clean a little quieter? That's noisy. I was just vacuuming normally, but Rhea was on a phone call and was complaining about me to the person on the other end, saying, hello, sorry about that. Yeah, it's Henry's mom. She's really noisy, isn't she? She should be able to do the housework quietly at this point. Even I was annoyed, and I told Henry about what had happened that day when he came home from work. You know, I'm not saying you have to do everything, but Rhea hasn't been helping at all with the housework. Not only that, but I got scolded just for vacuuming. It's normal to share chores, and I do my part, but I can't handle doing everything alone, especially when I get complaints, I told him. Henry replied, I'm sorry, I really am. I don't think Rhea means any harm. Maybe she was just in a bad mood today. I'll tell her to help out a bit more, so please cut her some slack today. But he didn't really take the matter seriously. Even so, I hoped that Henry would talk to Rhea, and I decided to watch how things unfolded without saying anything more. Half a year passed, and Rhea's attitude remained unchanged. She didn't even bother to pretend to help with the housework. I was utterly exhausted from managing all the chores for 3 people and constantly trying to accommodate Rhea. During this time, my second son, Lucas, happened to mention, "Mom, your birthday's coming up, right? Since Henry and Rhea will likely celebrate it on the day itself, why don't we celebrate it today? Renly also has a present for you, so let's go out for dinner." I accepted the invitation gladly. Lucas and his wife lived in an apartment about 30 minutes away from our house, so we didn't get to see each other often. Renly, Lucas's wife, was always kind and gentle, showing me a lot of care. When Lucas invited me, I replied without hesitation, "I'd love to, of course I'll go." That evening, after preparing dinner for Henry and Rhea, I joined Lucas and his family for dinner. They had reserved my favorite restaurant and surprised me with flowers and a gift bag for my birthday. It was a delightful evening, and I couldn't contain my happiness, saying, "Ah, this is so refreshing. It's been a long time since I've felt this happy." Moved by my words, Lucas asked, "Has something been bothering you with Henry? When you say it's been a while since you felt happy, it concerns me. Have things been tough for you lately?" Although I hadn't planned to complain, I explained that I was managing all the housework because Rhea wouldn't help, and how I had been scolded for being noisy and spoken to harshly. Lucas, exchanging glances with Renly, spoke up, "Mom, you don't have to endure this if it's difficult. You have income from the stocks and apartment rents Dad left behind, right? You're only staying with them because Henry wanted it that way. But if Rhea treats you badly and Henry doesn't support you, you shouldn't have to live like this. If it's hard for you to say it, I'll intervene." Renly added, "If you feel lonely living alone, we can live together. I love you very much, so please don't hesitate." Their words moved me deeply, and I felt tears welling up. I expressed my gratitude and decided to persevere a little longer, reassured by their support. "Thank you, but I'll keep trying. They're my precious family after all. I truly want to find harmony with Rhea," I replied. Returning home that night, I noticed the dishes they had used were still in the sink. With a sigh, I began to clean up but stopped myself, thinking, I always do this. It's only fair they do it tomorrow morning. So, I left the dishes as they were and retired to bed. The next morning, as I prepared breakfast, Rhea came into the kitchen. While cooking, I greeted her, "Good morning, Rhea. I'll handle breakfast. Could you please wash the dishes from yesterday?" Rhea ignored my request and instead settled on the couch, engrossed in her smartphone. Frustration bubbled up within me at her dismissive attitude, and I couldn't help but raise my voice. "It's basic courtesy to clean up after yourself." In her usual manner, Rhea retorted, "I've told you countless times, isn't that your job, mom-in-law? You know the saying, he who does not work, neither shall he eat. You eat every day, so you should do the housework." Henry hurried into the room upon hearing our exchange, looking concerned. "What's going on so early in the morning? Are you two arguing?" he asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. With a sigh, I explained to Henry, "I simply asked Rhea to wash the dishes from yesterday. I was just stating the obvious." Upon hearing my reply, Henry muttered, "Seriously, this early?" and headed to wash his face, clearly irritated. But I couldn't hold back any longer and snapped, "It's not just about this morning. Every single day, I'm the one doing all the housework. Everything, including yours. Do you realize how exhausting that is? At the very least, you could wash your own dishes." My outburst, rare for me, startled Henry. "I'm sorry, I'll take care of it," he said hastily, moving to start on the dishes. However, Rhea interjected, "Why should Henry, who works outside, have to do that? You depend on Henry, so it's your responsibility, mom-in-law." She stopped Henry's hands, clearly dissatisfied with the idea of him doing chores. Then she turned to me and said, "You're living off a pension like a pauper, causing trouble. Get out of this apartment." That was the last straw for me. Why should I leave my own home? This house is in my name, I retorted to Rhea. Turning to Henry, I confessed my true feelings. "Rhea seems to have it all wrong, but you understand, Henry. It's you two who should leave. I can't bear living together anymore. I've reached my limit." Rhea looked visibly surprised and asked, "What do you mean? How can a jobless mother-in-law own a house? Aren't you relying on Henry?" I clarified, "I am the landlord of this apartment. I don't rent. This apartment belongs to me. When Henry's father passed away, he left me stocks, apartments, and land. I manage these assets and generate enough income to support myself. I've never depended on Henry financially. Even after we started living together, I cover most of the utilities and food expenses. Ria was speechless, turning to Henry for confirmation. So we've been living without spending much money, she queried. Henry simply nodded in response. I chimed in, while Henry may have wanted to provide for you, Ria, he couldn't possibly manage all aspects of my financial life, taking you out to eat, shopping, and such. Henry himself isn't earning that much yet. At that moment, Ria seemed to grasp the seriousness of the situation. Her demeanor changed, her face paling as she said, I'm sorry, mother-in-law. I didn't realize, and I've been disrespectful. Please forgive me. Realizing that her comfortable living arrangement could be at risk if we parted ways, Ria continued to apologize repeatedly in a flustered manner. Understanding their realization, I reassured them, I'm not saying I won't forgive you. We're family after all, but continuing to live together isn't feasible. We need to address this. You both should find a place to rent and live on your own. Henry reacted urgently to my suggestion. I worry about you, Mom. From now on, Ria and I will pitch in with the housework. I just don't want you to be alone. However, I reassured him, I'll be fine. If you're that concerned, I can stay with Lucas and his family. They offered when we went out for dinner recently, knowing I might be uneasy about living alone. Initially, I wanted to give it more time living with you two, but now I see it's not feasible. It might inconvenience Lucas, but I'll be closer to them. Henry seemed to grasp my resolve, simply saying, I understand, without further comment. In contrast, Ria retorted, so you're abandoning us even though we've been taking care of you. Her tone blamed me. Recognizing arguing would be fruitless, I chose not to respond. Within a month, Henry and Ria secured a new place and moved out. Given their budget, they could only afford an older, smaller apartment. Ria, who had never worked previously, reportedly took up a part-time job to make ends meet. Henry confided that Ria frequently complained about managing household chores and her job. Their life seemed fraught with continuous arguments, and Henry appeared utterly exhausted. Henry continued to reach out, pleading, if only you would forgive us, we want to live together again. Yet I have firmly decided not to revisit that chapter of my life. After Henry and Ria moved out, I relocated to Lucas's home. Despite my insistence that they needed to accommodate me, Lucas expressed, having you here really helps, Mom. Renly also wants you to stay. She's eager to learn your cooking. Thus, we made the decision to live together. Since then, Lucas and Renly have assured me, feel free to speak up if something bothers you. We'll manage chores together, ensuring we don't inconvenience each other. Nowadays, I spend my time cooking alongside Renly, pursuing my hobbies, and simply enjoying a fulfilling life. I am genuinely content. Going forward, I strive to maintain this happiness without compromise.
From my earliest memories, I knew I was a disappointment. Not that my parents ever said it directly, they didn't have to. The way they looked at me when I was born, hoping for their first son, and then again when my sister Kate arrived 3 years later, told me everything I needed to know. I was Jenna, their firstborn daughter, and I would never be enough. Maybe the next one will be a boy, I overheard Mom telling Dad after Kate was born. But there wasn't going to be a next one. Complications during Kate's birth meant Mom couldn't have any more children. Their dreams of having a son were put on hold, transferred to some distant future when their daughters might give them grandsons instead. Growing up in our modest suburban home, I watched as Kate quickly figured out how to wrap our parents around her little finger. She'd bat those big brown eyes of hers, and they'd melt like ice cream on a hot summer day. Meanwhile, I grew more independent, learning to rely on myself rather than chase after attention I was never going to get. Kate knew exactly what buttons to push to get what she wanted. I had everything I needed: clothes, food, shelter, education, but emotional warmth was always in short supply, at least for me. Over time, I learned to accept it, to build my own internal fortress of self-reliance. I'm going to study economics, I announced at dinner during my senior year of high school. Mom and Dad exchanged looks across the table. Are you sure, honey? Mom asked, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. That's such a technical field. Dad nodded in agreement. What about something more suitable for a young lady? Teaching, maybe? Or nursing? I stood my ground. I've already been accepted to State University. My grades are good enough for a partial scholarship. Well, Mom sighed, I suppose it's your choice. The disappointment in her voice was familiar by now, almost comforting in its predictability. Kate, who was still in high school, smirked from across the table. "I'm thinking of studying psychology," she announced, and our parents immediately brightened. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Mom exclaimed. "You've always been so good with people." I pushed my peas around my plate, letting their voices wash over me like background noise. I'd learned long ago that fighting for their approval was a losing battle. Instead, I focused on my future, on the independence that college would bring. I met James during my sophomore year at State University. He was a senior in the economics department, and we literally bumped into each other in the library's financial section. I dropped my statistics textbook, he picked it up, and that's how our story began. "You're in Professor Martinez's macro class, right?" he asked, handing me back my book. "I've seen you asking all the smart questions." I blushed, not used to anyone noticing me in a positive way. "Yeah, that's me. The annoying one who keeps the class running late." "Not annoying at all," he smiled. "Actually, I was wondering if you'd like to grab coffee sometime? I could tell you about the upper-level courses you'll be taking next year." That coffee date turned into dinner, which turned into movie nights, which turned into us being inseparable. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen and appreciated. James didn't compare me to anyone else, he just liked me for who I was. After he graduated, James took a job at Anderson Consulting while I finished my degree. He waited for me, and the moment I graduated, we decided to move in together. We found a small apartment downtown, nothing fancy, but it was ours. "Mom, Dad, this is James," I said during his first visit to my parents' house. The change in their attitude was immediate and shocking. "Oh, James," Mom practically squealed. "We're so happy to finally meet you. Will you be joining us for Thanksgiving? Christmas, both?" Dad clapped him on the shoulder. "Son, we've heard so much about you. Tell me about your job. Jenna says you're in finance?" The word son caught my attention. Of course, they were finally getting the son they'd always wanted, even if it was through marriage. I watched as they fawned over James, asking him about his plans for the future and when he thought he might want to settle down. Kate, who was living at home after graduating and still hadn't found a serious boyfriend, sat in the corner during these family gatherings, shooting daggers at us with her eyes. For once, I was the sister who had something she wanted, and she couldn't stand it. After a year of living together, during a quiet dinner at home, James got down on one knee and proposed. I said yes immediately, and we decided on a small, intimate wedding, despite my parents' protests about wanting something more elaborate. "It's your big day," Mom argued. "Don't you want something more special?" "This is special," I insisted. "It's exactly what we want." The ceremony was perfect, just close friends and family in a small garden venue. James and I exchanged vows, had a lovely dinner reception, and went back to our apartment as husband and wife. It felt right, starting our married life in the same place where we'd begun building our life together. The questions started almost immediately after the honeymoon. "So, when can we expect some good news?" Mom would ask, her eyes gleaming with barely concealed desperation for a grandson. "We're saving for a house first," I'd explain, again and again. "We want to be financially stable before starting a family." Dad would shake his head disapprovingly. "Your mother and I didn't have much when we started out, and we managed just fine." Every family dinner became an update on their friends' growing families. "Did you hear? The Hendersons just became grandparents again, another boy," or "the Smith's daughter just announced she's pregnant, and she's younger than you, Jenna." Finally, after 2 years of saving, James and I bought our first house. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was ours, well, ours and the bank's. The moment we signed those mortgage papers, I knew the baby questions would intensify. And they did. What I hadn't expected was Kate's announcement just 3 months later. "I'm pregnant," she declared during Sunday dinner, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "It's Mark's." Mark was her boyfriend of 6 months, a guy none of us particularly liked. The next few months were a whirlwind. Mark disappeared as soon as Kate started showing, leaving her alone and moving back in with our parents. But instead of this being a scandal or shame, my parents transformed their house into a shrine to their upcoming grandchild. When little Emily was born, you'd have thought she was royalty. My parents converted Kate's old room into a nursery, bought every baby item imaginable, and basically turned their lives upside down to help raise their granddaughter. Isn't she perfect? Mom would coo, rocking Emily during our visits. Don't you just want one of your own, Jenna? What hurt more than my parents' constant pressure was watching James with Emily. He'd get down on the floor to play with her, make silly faces, and spend hours entertaining her with stuffed animals and children's books. James is such a natural with children, Mom would say pointedly. He's going to make such a wonderful father. I started monitoring my cycle, taking vitamins, and doing everything the pregnancy websites recommended. Month after month, we tried. And month after month, nothing happened. Meanwhile, James spent more and more time at my parents' house, playing with Emily. She's such a sweet kid, he'd say on our drives home. Did you see how she's starting to walk now? And she almost said uncle today. You're so good with her, my mother would praise him. Just imagine how wonderful you'll be with your own children. I'd smile and nod, but inside, a knot of anxiety was growing. Why wasn't I pregnant yet? What if something was wrong? But I pushed these thoughts aside, telling myself it would happen when it was meant to happen. After a year of trying with no success, I was still trying to stay positive. These things take time, I'd tell myself. But when Mom found out we'd been actively trying for a year, she went into full panic mode. A whole year? Jenna, something's wrong. You need to see a doctor immediately. She started forwarding me contact information for fertility specialists before I'd even left their house that day. Finally, to get everyone off my back, I made an appointment. James came with me, holding my hand in the sterile exam room as the doctor ran through her questions. Blood tests, ultrasounds, and more tests followed. Then came the day of the results. I'm sorry, the doctor said gently, but the tests indicate that you're infertile. The words hit me like a physical blow. James squeezed my hand, but I barely felt it. The doctor kept talking about options and treatments, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. That evening, James and I sat in our kitchen, barely touching our takeout dinner. We can look into adoption or IVF, he said finally. There are options. I nodded numbly, but the devastation felt complete. How could I face my family with this news? The answer came at the next family dinner. I decided to just get it over with, like ripping off a band-aid. Mom, Dad, I said during a lull in the conversation, I need to tell you something. I saw a specialist and I took a deep breath. I can't have children. I'm infertile. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Mom's face contorted with disgust. Infertile, she spat the word like it was poison. What kind of woman can't even do the one thing she's meant to do? Dad wouldn't even look at me. An empty vessel, he muttered. Just an empty flower. Kate sat there smirking, bouncing Emily on her knee. Well, I guess we know who the real woman in the family is. I looked at James, desperate for support, but he just sat there, staring at his plate. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. I pushed back from the table and ran out of the house, ignoring their calls behind me. After that night, I couldn't bring myself to go back to their house. But James kept going, spending time with Emily, chatting with Kate, listening to my parents. He'd come home full of stories. Emily learned a new song today, he'd say. You should have seen her dancing around the living room. Or, Kate made this amazing lasagna. She's really getting good at cooking. Each word felt like a knife in my heart. I'd lie awake at night, listening to James's steady breathing beside me, wondering if he resented me for not being able to give him children. The guilt ate at me constantly, made worse every time he came home from another visit to my parents' house, with that wistful look in his eyes after playing with Emily. It was a regular Tuesday when my world fell apart. I came home early from work, my arms full of Chinese takeout, James's favorite. But the house was empty and dark. His car wasn't in the driveway, which wasn't unusual, but something felt off. I called his cell. No answer. Called again. Straight to voicemail. Then my phone buzzed, a notification from Instagram. Kate Thompson posted a new photo. I usually ignored her posts, but something made me click this time. My stomach dropped as the image loaded, James sitting on my parents' couch, Emily in his lap, and Kate pressed against his side, all three of them grinning at the camera. The caption read, "Family time with my favorite people." My hands were shaking as I grabbed my car keys. The rational part of my brain tried to argue that there could be an innocent explanation, but my gut knew better. The whole drive to my parents' house, my mind raced through every interaction between James and Kate over the past year, seeing them in a horrible new light. Their driveway was full, Mom's car, Dad's truck, James's sedan. The front door was unlocked, as always. I slipped inside quietly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst from my chest. Voices drifted from the living room. "James, you know we think of you as a son already," my mother was saying. "And you deserve to be happy. You've been so wonderful with Emily," my father added. "And Kate, well, she's young, fertile. You could have more children together. Think about it," my mother continued. "Why stay trapped in a marriage with—" She lowered her voice, but I could still hear the disgust. "A barren woman?" I couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. I burst into the room, making them all jump. The scene was like something from a nightmare, my parents and sister on one couch, James in Dad's armchair, Emily playing with blocks on the floor between them. One big happy family, plotting to exclude me. "What the hell is going on here?" My voice came out stronger than I felt. James at least had the decency to look ashamed, but my parents were defiant. "Jenna," Mom stood up, chin raised. "We're just having an honest discussion about what's best for everyone." "Best for everyone?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "You're trying to convince my husband to leave me for my sister." "Well, someone has to think about James's future," Dad shot back. "You can't give him what he wants, what he deserves. Kate can." I turned to James, waiting for him to defend our marriage, to tell them they were crazy. Instead, he stared at the floor. "James?" My voice cracked on his name. "I'm sorry, Jenna," he said quietly. "But they're right. I want children, a family. And I've developed feelings for Kate." Kate smirked, reaching out to put her hand on James's arm. "Get out, you don't belong here anymore. This is my family now." I looked at each of their faces, my father's stern disapproval, my mother's cold satisfaction, Kate's triumphant smile, James's guilty avoidance. For years of marriage, a lifetime of family ties, all meaningless. Without another word, I turned and walked out. I drove home in a daze, packed a suitcase on autopilot, and left a note for James, "File for divorce. I'll have my lawyer contact yours." The divorce was quick and clinical. We split everything down the middle. I found a small apartment across town and threw myself into my work, trying to forget. But social media had other plans. One morning, my coworker gasped at her phone during coffee break. "Oh my God, Jenna, I'm so sorry, I forgot to unfollow your sister." She tried to hide her screen, but I'd already seen it, Kate in a massive white dress, James in a tux, my parents beaming beside them. "It's fine," I said, even though it wasn't. "I hope they're very happy together." A year later, another announcement popped up, "Welcome baby Rose." My replacement had produced the daughter they'd always wanted. James now had his perfect little family, Emily, who he'd adopted, and his new baby with Kate. I deleted all my social media accounts that day. Life has a funny way of surprising you, though. I was shopping for groceries one Saturday when my cart collided with someone else's. "I am so sorry," a deep voice said. I looked up into the kindest brown eyes I'd ever seen. "I'm Michael," he said, helping me pick up my scattered items. "Can I buy you coffee to apologize for being a klutz?" One coffee turned into dinner, dinner into dating, and suddenly I was falling in love again. But this time I was honest from the start. "I need to tell you something," I said one night, 6 months into our relationship. "I can't have children. I'm infertile." Michael took my hands in his. "Jenna, I love you. If we want kids someday, we'll adopt. Or we won't. I just want you." We got married in a small ceremony at the courthouse, just us and a few close friends. No family drama, no expensive dress, no expectations, just love. A year into our marriage, I started feeling strange. Nauseous in the mornings, dizzy at odd times. Michael insisted I see a doctor. "Mrs. Chen," the doctor said, looking at my test results. "Congratulations, you're pregnant." I stared at her. "That's impossible. I'm infertile, I have the tests to prove it." She smiled gently. "The human body is mysterious. Sometimes, despite all odds, pregnancy occurs even in cases of diagnosed infertility. It's rare, but it happens." Michael and I cried together that night, tears of joy, of disbelief, of hope. I didn't tell my family. They'd lost the right to share in my happiness. 9 months later, I held my son in my arms. 7 pounds, 6 ounces, a perfect, beautiful boy. Michael and I named him Alexander, defender of mankind. Looking at his tiny face, I felt nothing but pure love. No bitterness, no regret, no anger. Life had settled into a beautiful rhythm. Alexander was 2, Michael was the perfect father, and I had everything I'd ever wanted. We rarely ate out, preferring quiet family dinners at home, but that night Michael had gotten a promotion, so we decided to celebrate at La Maison, an upscale French restaurant downtown. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought I was imagining things. But no, there was Kate, my sister, locked in an intimate embrace with a man who definitely wasn't James. They were tucked away in a corner booth, but not well enough hidden. She was running her fingers through his hair, kissing him deeply, completely oblivious to the world around them. My hand shook as I pulled out my phone and discreetly took several photos. The lighting was dim, but the pictures were clear enough, there was no mistaking what was happening. "Jenna?" Michael touched my arm. "Are you okay? You've gone pale." I showed him the photos. "That's Kate. With someone who isn't her husband." Michael's jaw tightened. He knew our whole history, knew what Kate and James had done to me. "Are you going to send those to him?" My finger hovered over the send button. It would be so easy. One click and I could blow up their perfect little family, just like they'd blown up mine. But no, I said finally, saving the photos to a secure folder instead. "I'm better than them." A year passed. Alexander was growing into a brilliant, beautiful little boy with Michael's kind eyes and my stubborn chin. We were visiting a friend who lived in my old neighborhood, something I rarely did, and decided to take advantage of the nice weather by walking to a nearby park. That's when it happened. Just our luck, as we rounded the corner by the local supermarket, there they were, Mom, Dad, Kate, and James, loading groceries into their car. They saw us at the same moment we saw them. Their initial reaction was to turn away, noses in the air, pretending we were strangers. But then their eyes fell on Alexander, who was holding my hand and chattering away about the toy truck he'd brought to play with at the park. Mom stopped dead in her tracks. Who is this?" I could have ignored them. Should have, probably. But something made me stop. "This is my son, Alexander." My voice was steady, calm. Kate let out a harsh laugh. "Oh please. We all know you can't have children. Which agency did you adopt him from?" I looked her straight in the eye, enjoying the moment. "I gave birth to him 3 years ago. No adoption agency involved." "That's impossible," Mom sputtered. "The doctors said." "The doctors were wrong," I cut her off. "It happens sometimes. Rare, but it happens. And here's the proof." I gestured to Alexander, who was watching the strangers curiously. Dad's eyes went wide. "A grandson? We have a grandson?" They moved toward us then, Mom's arms outstretched like she had every right in the world to embrace my child. I stepped in front of Alexander, protectively. "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to throw me away like garbage and then claim my son as your grandson. You lost that privilege when you betrayed me." Kate's face had turned an ugly shade of red as she watched our parents' attention focus on my son. She'd always been the favorite after I was cast aside, and she couldn't stand seeing that shift. "Oh, get over yourself, Jenna," she spat. "So you managed to pop out one kid. Big deal. I still won in the end. I got your husband, I gave him a real family. 2 beautiful daughters. Face it, I'm still better than you'll ever be." My hand was already on my phone before she finished her rant. "Speaking of family, Kate, why don't you tell everyone about your extracurricular activities?" "What are you talking about?" James asked, his eyes narrowing. I pulled up the photos from the restaurant and held out my phone. "Here's your loving wife having dinner with someone else. Though I have to say, Kate, most people don't eat their dinner companion's face." The color drained from Kate's face as James snatched the phone from my hand. Mom and Dad crowded around to look, their mouths falling open in shock. "Who is he?" James demanded, his voice shaking with rage. Kate stammered, He's just a friend from work." "Friends don't kiss like that," I observed coolly. "And they certainly don't meet in dark corners of expensive restaurants while their spouses are at home with the kids." "Kate, how could you?" Mom gasped. "After everything." "Everything what?" I couldn't help but laugh. "After you helped her steal my husband? After you threw me away because you thought I couldn't have children? Karma's quite something, isn't it?" James and Kate were now screaming at each other right there in the parking lot. "Come on, sweetie," I said to Alexander, taking his hand. "Time to go home." We left them to their chaos, my son chattering happily about the park we were heading to, completely oblivious to the nuclear explosion we'd just walked away from. A month later, the community grapevine brought me the rest of the story. James, suspicious after discovering Kate's affair, had gotten himself tested. Turned out he was the one who was infertile, had been all along. Which meant baby Rose, the daughter Kate claimed was his, couldn't possibly be. He left her immediately, refusing to pay support for either Rose or Emily. Kate moved back in with our parents, her perfect life in shambles. They all tried reaching out to me after that, calls, emails, even showing up at our house unannounced. "Please, Jenna," Mom begged through the door. "We made a terrible mistake. Let us be part of Alexander's life. He's our only grandson." "You should have thought about that before you called me an empty vessel," I replied calmly. "Actions have consequences." Michael supported my decision completely. "Family isn't about DNA," he said one night as we watched Alexander playing with his blocks. "It's about love, respect, and loyalty. They showed you none of those things." He was right, of course. Looking at my little family now, my wonderful husband who loved me regardless of whether I could have children, my miracle son who proved all the doctors wrong, our home filled with laughter and joy, I knew I had everything I needed. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to have. Sometimes you have to build your own, with people who choose you back. I chose Michael, and he chose me. We chose Alexander, and he chose us right back with his first smile, his first word, his first steps. That's what real family means. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Growing up, I always knew I was second best. My name is Isabella, though everyone calls me Bella, and I'm the younger daughter in what appeared to be your typical middle-class family. My sister Catherine, Katie for short, was the golden child. 3 years older than me, she was blessed with naturally blonde hair that seemed to catch the sunlight just right in every photo. Mom never missed an opportunity to capture her perfect angel for the family album or social media. I wasn't ugly by any means. I had my own kind of pretty, dark hair, hazel eyes, and what my aunt called an interesting face. But in our house, interesting wasn't enough. Katie was the standard, and I was, well, just there. The favoritism wasn't subtle. When Katie needed new clothes, we'd spend entire weekends at the mall. When I needed something? We'll see next month, sweetie. Katie got the bigger bedroom because she needed space for her studying. She got a car for her 16th birthday. I got a watch for mine, not even a particularly nice one. The real kicker came during our respective high school graduations. When Katie graduated, our parents threw this massive party. Dad proudly announced they'd be paying for her college education. She was going to study to become a bank manager, following in his footsteps. Everyone toasted to her bright future. 3 years later, I graduated with even better grades than Katie had. I still remember sitting at our kitchen table, college acceptance letters spread out in front of me, watching my parents exchange uncomfortable glances. "Honey," Mom started, not quite meeting my eyes, "we just don't have the money for college right now. The market's been tough, and with Katie's tuition." Dad jumped in, "Maybe you could work for a year or two, save up some money?" I sat there, stunned into silence. The same parents who had just bought Katie a new laptop for college were telling me they couldn't afford my education. That night, I cried myself to sleep, but it was the last time I would cry over their favoritism. The next morning, I started job hunting. Within a month, I landed a position as a maid at the Grand Plaza Hotel, the fanciest hotel in our city. While Katie moved back home after college graduation, to save money, she said, I moved into a tiny studio apartment across town. Living on my own was tough at first, but it beat staying at home watching Katie bask in our parents' endless attention. My apartment might have been basic, but it was mine. Every night when I came home exhausted from work, I felt a sense of pride knowing I was making it on my own. I threw myself into my work at the Grand Plaza Hotel. While some of the other maids complained about the demanding guests and endless rooms to clean, I saw every task as an opportunity to learn the hotel business from the ground up. "Bella, you're the only one who consistently gets perfect room inspection scores," Mrs. Rodriguez, the head housekeeper, told me after just 3 months. "How do you do it?" "I just try to think about what I'd want if I were staying here," I replied, straightening my uniform. Within 6 months, I was promoted to head maid. That's when I first met him, James Richardson, the guest in room 742. He was probably in his mid-40s, distinguished looking, with salt and pepper hair and expensive suits. I noticed him watching me one morning while I was supervising the cleaning of the 7th floor. "Miss," he called out, "could I have a word?" What started as a simple request about extra towels turned into a 15-minute conversation about hotel operations. The next day, he happened to run into me again. And the next. And the next. "Join me for dinner tonight," he suggested casually on his 5th day at the hotel. "I know a lovely restaurant downtown." I straightened my shoulders and looked him directly in the eye. "Mr. Richardson, I appreciate the invitation, but I need to be clear, if you're looking for a temporary arrangement during your stay, I'm not interested." Instead of being offended, he laughed. "Fair enough. But my invitation stands, just dinner, nothing more." I declined politely but firmly. He continued to be friendly, but respectful, for the remainder of his 3-week stay. The day he checked out, he left me a business card with his number. I tucked it away and thought that would be the end of it. 2 weeks later, everything started changing. First, I was called to the hotel manager's office and offered a position at the front desk, a significant promotion. Before I could get used to my new role, I was promoted to head of the registration team. A few weeks after that, I became assistant manager of the front office. Within 2 months of Mr. Richardson's departure, I found myself as the manager of the entire front office. The speed of my advancement made my head spin. While I knew I was good at my job, this seemed almost too good to be true. The whispers started soon after. "She must be sleeping with Mr. Blackwood," I overheard one of the receptionists telling another, referring to our hotel owner. "Did you see how fast she moved up? Nobody gets promoted that quickly without, you know." I tried to ignore the gossip, but it stung. I'd worked hard for every promotion, stayed late, learned every aspect of the operation. Yet people assumed I'd slept my way to the top. The truth was, I'd barely even met Mr. Blackwood, let alone had an affair with him. One Monday morning, Mr. Blackwood's secretary called to schedule a meeting. My stomach churned. These unexpected meetings usually meant trouble. I knocked on his office door precisely at 2 p.m. "Come in, Bella," he called out. "Please, have a seat." Mr. Blackwood was a tall man in his 60s, with kind eyes that always seemed to be evaluating something. He shuffled some papers on his desk before looking up at me. "You've done exceptional work here," he began. "But there's something we need to discuss. Your position as front office manager typically requires a college degree in hospitality management or a related field." My heart sank. Here it was, they'd finally realized I wasn't qualified for the job. "I think it's time for you to go to college, Bella." I blinked, confused. "I'm sorry?" "The hotel will work with your schedule, of course. We want you to get your degree while maintaining your position here." My mind was spinning. This wasn't at all what I'd expected. "I don't know what to say," I stammered. "Thank you, but why?" He smiled, reaching into his desk drawer. "You know, I don't often take advice about personnel decisions from outside sources, but in your case, a good friend insisted I pay attention." He pulled out a business card and slid it across the desk. "If you're curious about why your career has taken such an interesting trajectory lately, give this number a call." I picked up the card, and my breath caught. It was the same number Mr. Richardson had given me months ago. That evening, sitting in my apartment, I stared at the card for a full hour before finally picking up my phone. My hands were shaking as I dialed. "I was wondering when you'd call," that familiar voice answered on the second ring. You're friends with Mr. Blackwood?" I managed to ask. James chuckled. "We've known each other for 30 years. When I spot talent, he trusts my judgment. So all these promotions were entirely earned," he cut in firmly. "I simply suggested he pay attention to your potential. Everything you achieved, you did on your own merit." We talked for hours that night. He explained how he'd watched me work during his stay, impressed by my attention to detail and natural leadership abilities. He'd seen something in me that reminded him of himself when he was younger, that drive to prove yourself against all odds. 2 days later, we had dinner at that same restaurant he'd first invited me to months ago. This time, I said yes. I enrolled in college the following week, majoring in hotel and restaurant management. James supported me every step of the way, not just emotionally but practically, helping me study, sharing his business experience, teaching me things no textbook could cover. Our relationship deepened naturally. There was no grand romantic gesture, no dramatic moment when everything changed. We simply grew closer day by day, until being together felt as natural as breathing. "Move in with me," he said one evening, 6 months after that first phone call. We were sitting on his penthouse balcony, looking out over the city lights. A month later, we were married in a small but elegant ceremony, and I moved from my tiny studio into his luxurious penthouse apartment. "Girl, you hit the jackpot," my friend Sarah exclaimed over coffee one afternoon. "Successful, handsome, and actually nice? Those kinds of men aren't supposed to exist." I laughed, but she wasn't wrong. James was everything I could have hoped for in a husband. He supported my education, celebrated my career achievements, and made me feel valued, something I'd never experienced growing up. My newfound happiness made family gatherings interesting, to say the least. Katie, who had always been the star of the show, was struggling to keep a man interested for more than a few weeks. Her career at the bank was going well, she'd made it to assistant manager, but her personal life was a mess. I'd catch her staring at James and me during holiday dinners, her eyes filled with barely concealed envy. The same sister who used to ignore me unless she needed something now couldn't stop watching my every move. "Did you see how Katie was looking at your ring all through Christmas dinner?" James asked me afterward. "I thought she was going to drill a hole through it with her eyes." She's always been used to having the best of everything, I sighed. I don't think she knows how to handle not being the center of attention anymore. The situation got more awkward when my parents started their campaign to get Katie married off. Mom would corner me at every family gathering. "Sweetie," she'd say in that syrupy voice she used when she wanted something, "surely James must have some nice friends? Single ones? Katie's not getting any younger, you know." Dad was more direct. "Your sister deserves someone successful, like James. You should help her out, it's what family does." The irony wasn't lost on me. The same parents who couldn't find money for my education were now trying to use my connections to benefit their favorite daughter. "James must know lots of eligible businessmen," Katie herself finally said one day, cornering me in the kitchen during Easter dinner. "Why haven't you introduced me to any of them?" I looked at my sister, really looked at her. The perfect blonde hair was still there, but her eyes held a desperate edge I'd never seen before. "Maybe because I don't want to be responsible for someone else's love life," I replied carefully. "Besides, relationships aren't about just finding someone wealthy, Katie." "Easy for you to say," she snapped. "You already got the rich husband." I walked away from that conversation knowing I'd made the right choice to keep my distance. Something about Katie's attitude toward finding a wealthy man made me uncomfortable. It felt less like she wanted love and more like she was hunting for a prize. I thought I'd finally found my happily ever after. The next 2 years seemed to prove me right, at least on the surface. But slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to change. It started with small things. James began coming home later and later from work. His business trips, which used to be occasional, became more frequent. At first, I made excuses for him in my head. He was busy, the company needed him, this was just a temporary phase. "Sorry, darling, emergency board meeting," he'd text, missing another dinner I'd prepared. "This trip might take 2 weeks instead of 1, he'd say, barely looking up from his phone. Our home felt emptier with each passing day. The sound of my heels echoing through our penthouse apartment became a lonely reminder of how much time I spent there alone. Finally, one evening, I decided enough was enough. I waited up for him, determined to have a real conversation about what was happening to us. "James, we need to talk," I said when he walked in at 11 p.m. He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold, distant, almost annoyed. "Yes, we do." What happened next felt like a scene from someone else's life, not mine. "I want a divorce," he said flatly, as if he were discussing the weather. "I don't love you anymore." Actually, I'm not sure I ever did. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "What?" "James, if something's wrong, we can work on it." "There's nothing to work on, Bella. It's over. My lawyer will be in touch." Everything moved at warp speed after that. Within days, I was served divorce papers. The prenuptial agreement I'd signed, the one I'd thought was just a formality, meant I had no claim to anything. Not the apartment, not his money, not even the furniture we'd picked out together. In a daze, I packed my clothes and personal items into 3 suitcases. With nowhere else to go, I called my parents. "Mom, Dad, I need to stay with you for a little while," I said, trying to keep my voice from breaking. "Just until I figure things out." The silence on the other end should have told me everything. "Oh, honey," Mom's voice dripped with false sympathy, "we're in the middle of renovations right now. The guest room is completely torn apart." "I could sleep on the couch," I suggested. "Well, you see," Dad jumped in, "we're having the living room painted too. And you know how small this house is." They had excuse after excuse, each one more transparent than the last. What hurt most was the barely concealed satisfaction in their voices. They were actually happy about my fall from grace. I found a small apartment across town and tried to throw myself into my work. But suddenly, nothing was going right there either. Every report I submitted came back with corrections. Every decision I made was questioned. Finally, Mr. Blackwood called me into his office. The same man who had championed my career now couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Bella," he said, shuffling papers on his desk, "perhaps it would be best if you considered other opportunities. We'd be happy to provide a reference." Depression hit me hard after losing everything. For a month, I barely left my bed. The silence from my family was deafening, not a single call, not even a text to check if I was alive. Thank God for Sarah. "Get up," she demanded one morning, barging into my apartment with coffee and bagels. "This isn't the Bella I know." "The Bella you knew had a life," I mumbled into my pillow. "No," she yanked my curtains open, "the Bella I know is a fighter. The one who started as a maid and worked her way up to management. The one who put herself through college while working full-time. That Bella's still in there somewhere." Thank goodness I'd always been careful with money. Even with the prenup, I had my own savings from years of working and living below my means. James had taught me one useful thing, at least, always have a backup plan. One sleepless night, staring at my ceiling, it hit me. I knew the hotel business inside and out. I'd done every job from cleaning toilets to managing the front office. I knew what worked, what didn't, and most importantly, what guests really wanted. "I'm going to open my own hotel," I told Sarah over breakfast the next morning. She nearly choked on her coffee. "That's ambitious." "I've got savings for startup costs, but I'll need investors," I said, already making lists on my phone. "And I know exactly what kind of hotel I want to create." I threw myself into research, created a detailed business plan, and started networking. At a charity event for emerging entrepreneurs, I met two investors who loved my vision for a boutique hotel that would combine luxury with personal attention. The first year was brutal. I worked reception during the day, did paperwork at night, and filled in for every position when needed. Once, I spent 3 days doing housekeeping when my maid got the flu. But every exhausting moment felt different than before. This time, I was building something for myself. Slowly but surely, the hotel began to succeed. Word spread about our personalized service and attention to detail. By year 3, we were turning a profit. By year 5, I had paid back my investors in full, and the hotel was entirely mine. During all this time, my family remained silent. They'd cut me out of their lives so completely, it was as if I'd never existed. No more holiday invitations, no family gatherings, nothing. At first, it hurt, but gradually, I realized it was a blessing. Their absence meant no more comparisons, no more subtle put-downs, no more feeling like I wasn't enough. I did occasionally check Katie's social media, old habits die hard, I guess. That's how I learned she'd finally found her rich man and had a baby. Her posts were full of designer baby clothes and exotic vacations. She seemed to have everything she'd always wanted. 2 years passed like a whirlwind. The hotel wasn't just successful, it had become the city's go-to destination for travelers seeking luxury with a personal touch. Travel bloggers regularly featured us in their content, praising our unique approach to hospitality. "We should do something to give back to the community," I told my management team one morning. "Something big." That's how the idea for our first charity gala was born. We transformed the hotel's grand ballroom into a glittering wonderland, invited local celebrities, business leaders, and press. The event aimed to raise money for educational scholarships for underprivileged students, fitting, given my own history with education. The gala was a massive success. Local TV stations covered it, online news sites ran features about the rags to riches story of the hotel's owner, and suddenly, I found myself in the spotlight. 3 days later, my front desk manager called my office. "Ms. Bennett, your parents are in the lobby. They're quite insistent about seeing you. They say they won't leave until you come down." I took a deep breath, straightened my suit jacket, and headed to the lobby. There they were, Mom and Dad, looking older but just as entitled as ever. "Bella," Mom rushed forward for a hug I deftly avoided. "Why are you here?" I asked coldly. "Can't parents want to reconnect with their daughter?" Dad tried to sound hurt. "We've seen how successful you've become. We're so proud." Proud? I laughed bitterly. You weren't proud when I needed a place to stay after my divorce. You weren't proud during the 7 years you didn't bother to call. Water under the bridge, Mom waved her hand dismissively. Family should stick together in hard times. Speaking of which, her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Katie's going through such a difficult period. Her boyfriend left her, and now she's all alone with the baby. He won't pay any child support. Surely you could help your sister out. Perhaps it was morbid curiosity, or maybe just a desire for closure, but something made me ask, how exactly do you expect me to help Katie? Mom's eyes lit up, thinking she'd found an opening. You could talk to her baby's father. Make him understand he needs to support his child. I couldn't help but laugh. And why would this man listen to me? I don't even know him. Don't be coy, Bella, Dad snapped. Of course you know James. He was your husband, after all. The world stopped spinning for a moment. The pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicked into place with sickening clarity. My sister's mysterious rich boyfriend. My parents' sudden distance. The timing of my career's collapse. James? I whispered. Katie and James? Well, it's not like it was planned, Mom said defensively. These things just happen. These things just happen? My voice rose. My husband and my sister? And you knew? You knew all this time? Katie and James fell in love, Dad said, as if that explained everything. We couldn't very well take sides. Couldn't take sides? I was nearly screaming now. You absolutely took sides. You cut me out of your lives. You refused to help me when I had nowhere to go. And now you have the audacity to come here and ask for my help. Don't be so dramatic, Mom huffed. Everything worked out for the best. Look at you, you have your own hotel now. So James did the right thing, having you fired from your old job. Katie thought it would be too awkward having you work there. I stared at my parents, these people who had raised me, who were supposed to love and protect me. In that moment, I saw them clearly for the first time, not as the parents who had favored Katie, but as willing accomplices in destroying my life. Get out, I said quietly. Now, Bella, Mom started. Get out, I screamed. Security. 2 of my security guards appeared instantly. These people are banned from the premises, I told them, my voice shaking with rage. They are never to be allowed in this hotel again, under any circumstances. Escort them out. You ungrateful little, Dad began, but the guards were already moving them toward the door. You'll regret this, Mom shouted. Family is all you have. No, I called after them. Family is supposed to love you, support you, protect you. You're not family. You're just people who happened to raise me. That was the last time I spoke to my parents. Through mutual friends and social media, I've heard snippets of what happened after. Katie and James's relationship imploded spectacularly. She posts daily rants about him on social media, calling him every name in the book, while he threatens her with lawsuits for defamation. My parents lost most of their retirement savings in a bad investment and had to downsize their house. Meanwhile, my life has taken a wonderful turn. 6 months ago, I met Michael at a hotel industry conference. He's kind, successful in his own right, and most importantly, he loves me for who I am, not what I can give him. We're getting married next spring. Sometimes, late at night, I scroll through Katie's angry social media posts about James, watching their dirty laundry being aired for all to see. I find myself laughing at the cosmic justice of it all. My sister, who thought she'd won it all by stealing my husband, now posts daily sob stories about being a single mom. James, who thought he'd upgraded to the better sister, is watching his reputation get dragged through the mud. And me? The sister they thought they'd destroyed? I'm thriving. My hotel is expanding to a second location next year. Michael and I are planning our future together. And most importantly, I'm finally free from the toxic family that never really loved me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's living well and watching karma do its work from a safe distance, preferably with a glass of champagne in hand. I'm Amalia, and from my earliest memories, responsibility was my constant companion. Our modest home was always bustling with activity, my 2 younger brothers running around, and later, my baby sister who came into our lives when I was 10. "Amalia, honey, could you help change Sarah's diaper?" Mom would call out, her voice tired from working double shifts. I'd drop whatever I was doing and rush to help. That was our normal, everyone pitched in, except Sarah. From the moment she arrived, she was different. "She's just a baby, let her be," Dad would say, waving off any concerns about her behavior. I watched as my parents worked themselves to exhaustion, trying to provide for us all. Dad at the construction site, Mom cleaning houses, they did everything they could to keep food on our table and dreams alive in our hearts. My brothers, Mike and David, were the middle children, often lost in the shuffle between my responsibilities and Sarah's privileges. We shared knowing looks across the dinner table when Sarah would throw another tantrum and get her way again. I started working right after high school, determined to break free from the cycle of just getting by. The local diner wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. Every penny I earned went into my college fund jar, hidden away in my closet. I'd count it late at night, dreaming of the day I'd have enough to start classes at the community college. Within a year, my managers noticed my dedication. I went from waitressing to handling the books, and suddenly, my college dreams didn't seem so far-fetched anymore. I enrolled in evening classes, juggling work and studies with a determination that surprised even me. The exhaustion was real. Some nights I'd fall asleep over my textbooks, only to wake up at dawn for another shift. But watching Sarah sleep until noon, skip school whenever she felt like it, and face no consequences only fueled my drive to succeed. "You're going to burn yourself out," Dad warned one evening, finding me studying in the kitchen at midnight. I looked up from my accounting homework and smiled. "Maybe, but I'm going somewhere, Dad. I promise you that." My college degree opened doors I never thought possible. First National Bank hired me as a junior analyst, and I threw myself into the work with the same determination that got me through school. Within months, my supervisor pulled me aside. "Amalia, I've never seen someone pick things up so quickly," she said. "Keep this up, and you'll go far here." She wasn't wrong. I had a knack for numbers and an even better one for dealing with people. While others complained about office politics, I navigated them effortlessly. Maybe all those years of managing family dynamics had taught me something useful after all. Meanwhile, my brothers Mike and David had moved out, starting their own lives. But Sarah? She was still at home, living the same consequence-free life she always had. Mom would call me with updates I didn't want to hear. "Sarah was out until 3 a.m. again," she'd say, sighing. "I worry, but you know how she is." I did know. I also knew about the parade of boyfriends, the failing grades, and the general lack of direction. But it wasn't my problem anymore. I had my own life now, my own apartment, my own goals. Then came the call that changed everything. "Sarah's pregnant," Mom announced one morning. "The father's gone to Arizona. Says he wants nothing to do with it." I gripped my phone tighter. And we'll help her raise the baby, of course. What else can we do? Of course they would. Sarah was still their precious baby, even at 18, even pregnant with her own child. I stayed silent, already knowing what was coming next. "You'll help too, won't you, Amalia? Come over on weekends? You're so good with children." That's when I started developing an impressive array of excuses. Urgent work projects. Professional development courses. Client meetings. Anything to avoid spending my precious free time taking care of yet another child. "I don't understand you anymore," Mom said during one particularly tense phone call. "You used to be so helpful." "I used to be a child forced to be helpful," I corrected her. "I'm an adult now, with my own life." "But family?" Family works both ways, Mom. Or have you forgotten the money I send every month? That usually shut them up, at least temporarily. The checks I wrote were substantial, enough to cover Sarah's prenatal care, then baby supplies, then ongoing expenses. But it was never enough to buy their approval. My Aunt Lisa told me over coffee one day, "They're calling you heartless behind your back, you know. Saying you've changed, become cold." I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the cream create patterns in the dark liquid. Let them talk. They've never understood me anyway. They say you're ungrateful, she pressed on. I looked her straight in the eye. Ungrateful for what? The privilege of raising their other children? The opportunity to now raise their grandchild? I've earned everything I have, Aunt Lisa. Everything. The promotion to senior analyst came through that week. My salary increased again, and so did the checks I sent home. But I kept my boundaries firm. No weekends babysitting. No emergency childcare. No last-minute favors. Let them call me callous. I'd spent enough of my life being the responsible one. Between client meetings and financial reports, romance wasn't exactly a priority. My dating app sat mostly unused on my phone until that rainy Tuesday night when James's message popped up. Something about his profile seemed different, maybe it was the genuine smile, or the lack of shirtless gym selfies. I notice you work in finance, his message read. I'm actually an investment advisor. Maybe we could bore each other with market talk over coffee? That coffee turned into dinner, which turned into weekends, which turned into 2 years of the kind of relationship I'd never thought I'd have time for. James was patient, understanding about my work schedule, and somehow managed to make me laugh even after my most stressful days. You know, he said one evening as we walked through the park, I never thought I'd find someone who understands both compound interest and my terrible jokes. Then came the proposal, nothing flashy, just us in my apartment after a home-cooked meal. I can't imagine my life without you, he said, holding out the ring. Marry me? I said yes, before he could even finish asking. Introducing him to my family was surprisingly smooth. Even Sarah behaved herself, which was a minor miracle. My parents were overjoyed, finally, their workaholic daughter was settling down. He's wonderful, Amalia, Mom gushed after our first family dinner together. And did you see how great he is with Tommy? She meant Sarah's son, my nephew, who had indeed taken an instant liking to James. The wedding was beautiful, and married life started out perfectly. James fit into the family like he'd always been there. He'd play with Tommy for hours when we visited, teaching him to throw a ball or build with blocks. Sarah watched these interactions with an odd intensity one didn't quite register at the time. He's going to be such an amazing father, she'd say, smiling at me meaningfully. You're so lucky, Amalia. That's when the questions started. First from my family, then from James himself. Don't you think it's time? He'd ask, watching Tommy run around our living room. We're not getting any younger. I'd explain my position again and again. I want us to be completely ready. We need our own house first, not this apartment. We need savings, security. But we're doing well, he'd counter. Both have good jobs, what are we waiting for? For the right time, I'd insist. One child, when we're ready. That's the plan we agreed on. He'd sigh and drop it, but I could feel his disappointment. During family gatherings, I'd catch him looking wistfully at Tommy. Your sister manages just fine, he'd say sometimes, not quite keeping the edge out of his voice. My sister lives with our parents and relies on their retirement savings, I'd reply. That's not what I want for our child. The tension grew slowly, almost imperceptibly. Like watching storm clouds gather on a sunny day, you know the rain is coming, but you tell yourself it's still far away. I was too focused on my next promotion, our house savings fund, the 5-year plan I'd carefully crafted. 5 years of marriage, and spring cleaning still meant going through James's mess. He never could keep his side of the closet organized. That Saturday morning started like any other, me sorting through old receipts, forgotten gym clothes, and the usual clutter that accumulated on his shelves. That's when I found it. A phone I'd never seen before, tucked behind his winter sweaters. My stomach tightened as I picked it up. Not his work phone. Not his personal phone. It wasn't even locked. My hands shook as I opened the messages. The first one I saw was from Sarah. My baby sister. Miss you already. Can't wait until Saturday when she's at work again. Hundreds of messages. Pictures I wish I could unsee. Conversations about me. LOL, she's so clueless, always at the office. All she cares about is her precious career. The timestamps went back months. My legs gave out, and I sat there on the closet floor, reading message after message, each one worse than the last. Then I saw it, the message that made my world stop spinning. Baby's definitely yours. Doctor confirmed today. 12 weeks along. I don't remember driving to my parents' house. I don't remember much except the phone clutched in my white-knuckled grip. Sarah was there, of course. Saturday morning cartoons with Tommy. One big happy family. What the hell is this? I threw the phone on the coffee table. Tommy looked up, startled, and Mom quickly sent him to play in his room. Sarah didn't even flinch. She picked up the phone, scrolled through it casually like she was checking the weather. Oh, well, I guess you know now. That's all you have to say? You're sleeping with my husband? She shrugged, actually shrugged. We're in love, Amalia. These things happen. And now with the baby coming, James and I want to get married. Once Amalia stops being difficult about it. Difficult? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'm being difficult? Well, yes, Sarah said, like she was explaining something simple to a child. You never wanted children anyway. You're too busy with your precious career. James needs a real family. I turned to my parents, waiting for them to say something, anything, to defend me. To condemn this betrayal. Instead, Mom sat down next to Sarah, patting her hand. Amalia, try to be reasonable. Tommy needs a father figure, and James is so good with him. And now with another baby coming. Reasonable? My voice cracked. My husband and sister are having an affair, and you want me to be reasonable? Dad cleared his throat. Well, you never wanted children, honey. And James, he's always wanted to be a father. Maybe this is for the best. When was the last time you even cooked him dinner? Sarah would make a proper wife. I looked at them, my family, all sitting there, defending the indefensible. Sarah, smug and pregnant with my husband's child. Mom, already planning the next wedding. Dad, avoiding my eyes, but clearly on their side. A proper wife, I repeated numbly. Like your precious Sarah, who mooches off you and cheats with her sister's husband. Sarah rolled her eyes. Don't be dramatic, Amalia. Just go back to your big office and your important meetings. Leave the family stuff to people who actually care about it. I barely remember the drive home from my parents' house. The world seemed unreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart instead of my own. When I walked through our front door, James was there in the living room, acting like it was just another normal Saturday. Hey, honey, he moved to hug me, that familiar smile on his face. The smile I used to love. The smile that now made me sick to my stomach. I stepped back, holding up his second phone. Want to explain this? The change in his face was instant, first confusion, then recognition, then fear. Where did you? Found it while cleaning. You really should find better hiding spots for your affair phones. Amalia, I can explain. Explain what? The messages? The photos? Or maybe explain how you got my sister pregnant? He tried denial first, like they all do. It's not, I didn't, but he must have seen something in my face, because suddenly his whole demeanor changed. The mask dropped completely. Fine. Yes, Sarah and I are together, he snapped. What did you expect? You're never home. All you care about is work, work, work. When was the last time we even had a real conversation about starting a family? Oh, so this is my fault? You cheated because I wanted financial security before having children? You never wanted children. Not really. You always had some excuse, the house, the savings, the right time. Sarah actually wants a family. She understands what's important in life. I looked at this man, this stranger wearing my husband's face, and felt nothing but disgust. What's important in life is loyalty, honor, basic human decency. But I guess those things aren't important to you or my precious sister. Don't act all high and mighty, he snarled. You're just angry because Sarah's giving me what you wouldn't. The divorce papers were filed the next day. I had documentation of the affair, so it went through quickly. My brothers, Mike and David, came to help me move out of the apartment. They were the only ones who stood by me. We always knew Sarah was spoiled, Mike said as we packed boxes, but this is a new low. David couldn't even say her name. They're dead to me, he declared. Both of them. Through my brothers, I heard the updates I never wanted but couldn't help knowing. James and Sarah got married in a small ceremony. My parents were there, of course, beaming proudly. The baby was born, a girl. They moved into a small house in the suburbs. Tommy started calling James Dad. Mom keeps trying to get us to visit them, Mike told me during one of our monthly dinners. Says we need to be a family again. We are a family, David said, raising his glass. The three of us, that's enough. I nodded, grateful for my brother's loyalty in a world where loyalty seemed to mean nothing anymore. We were the only ones who understood that some betrayals can't be forgiven, some bridges can't be rebuilt, and some families are better off broken. 4 years can change everything. My new apartment overlooked the city skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows, marble countertops, and enough space to finally display the art collection I'd always wanted. The Mercedes in my reserved parking spot gleamed under the garage lights. I'd made it, exactly as I'd planned. My brothers visited often, bringing news and rumors. Sarah and James struggling to make ends meet. 3 moves in 2 years, each apartment smaller than the last. But I didn't care. Their life wasn't my concern anymore. Until that Tuesday evening when my phone lit up with a number I'd hoped never to see again. Amalia? James's voice. 4 years older, but still familiar enough to make my stomach clench. Please don't hang up. I should have. Instead, I listened. We need your help, he said, as if he had any right to ask me for anything. Sarah's had an accident. Broke her leg badly, compound fracture. She's had surgery, but she can't move around, can't take care of the kids. And, she's pregnant again. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, wondering if this was some kind of cosmic joke. The kids need someone to pick them up from school, watch them until I get home from work. Tommy's getting too big to handle everything himself, and with the new baby coming. He paused. We thought maybe you could help. You thought what? My voice came out eerily calm. They're your nephews, Amalia. Your family. Sarah can't even get to the bathroom by herself right now. My family? I repeated. The sister who slept with my husband and the husband who cheated on me, that's my family? Don't be like that, he snapped, his tone shifting from pleading to accusatory. This isn't about us. It's about innocent children who need help. Or are you too selfish to care about them too? Selfish? I almost laughed. That's rich, coming from you. We're struggling here. His voice rose. Do you know how expensive kids are? I'm working overtime just to keep food on the table. We can't even afford a decent apartment anymore. Meanwhile, you're living it up in your luxury condo with your fancy car. So that's what this is about? Money? Not all of us can focus only on our careers, he said bitterly. Some of us have real responsibilities. Must be nice, having all that money and no one to spend it on but yourself. Must be nice having the family you stole and no way to support them, I replied coldly. Sounds like a real dream come true. The kids need parents who didn't build their relationship on betrayal. Goodbye, James. I hung up mid-protest and blocked his number before he could call back. My mother's number showing up on my phone was almost as unwelcome as James's had been. I answered anyway, some old habit I couldn't quite break. Amalia? Mom's voice had that tone, the one she always used when she wanted something. We need to talk about Sarah. She needs help. James called you, didn't he? About her leg? I paced my living room, fighting the urge to hang up immediately. Yes, he did. And I'll tell you what I told him, not my problem. How can you be so cold? She's your sister. She's struggling with 3 children, well, soon to be 3. The sister who slept with my husband? That sister? Mom sighed heavily. That was years ago, Amalia. You need to move past it. We're family. Funny how family only matters when you need something from me. We've helped her as much as we can, Mom's voice cracked a little. But she keeps asking for money, for the kids, for the rent, for everything. We've gone through all our savings. Your father and we can't keep this up. I couldn't help but laugh. So the golden child is finally becoming too expensive to maintain? Don't be cruel. She's never learned to. Mom trailed off. To what? Work? Support herself? Take responsibility for her actions? Gee, I wonder why that is. She just keeps having babies, Mom said, frustration finally breaking through. She won't look for a job, says she's too busy with the children. But she's always asking for money, always needing something. Sounds like exactly the person you raised her to be, I said coldly. The princess who never had to face consequences. You have no right to speak to me like that. Mom's voice rose. I am your mother. And whose fault is it that Sarah turned out this way? Who taught her that she never had to work for anything? That someone would always bail her out? We did our best. No, you did your easiest. And now you're calling me because the monster you created is too expensive to feed. You have a duty to help your family. Mom was almost shouting now. After everything we've done for you. Everything you've done for me? I cut in. You mean like supporting my sister when she had an affair with my husband? Or like calling me selfish for wanting financial security before having children? I don't owe you anything. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with 4 years of pent-up rage. The expensive view from my apartment windows suddenly seemed like the best revenge, my life, built exactly as I'd planned it, without their help or their approval. Mike called me one evening while I was reviewing quarterly reports. You'll never guess who tried calling me today. Sarah, I already knew. The desperation tour was making its rounds. Bingo. Wanted me to help with the kids, maybe loan them some money until they get back on their feet. He snorted. As if they were ever on their feet to begin with. What did you tell her? Same thing David told her yesterday, that some betrayals can't be undone. That what she did to you wasn't just cheating, it was destroying a family. She started crying, saying we were being cruel, that family should help family. He paused. I reminded her she didn't seem too concerned about family when she was sleeping with your husband. I leaned back in my office chair, looking out at the city lights. How did she take that? About as well as you'd expect. Started screaming about how we're all against her, how nobody understands how hard her life is. He chuckled darkly. Guess karma finally caught up with her. 2 weeks later, David brought the news I'd been expecting. They moved in with Mom and Dad. All of them, Sarah, James, the kids, and the baby on the way. Dad's converting his workshop into another bedroom. How are Mom and Dad handling it? Remember how peaceful retirement was supposed to be? Well, now they're full-time babysitters and ATMs. Mom's watching the kids while Sarah recovers, which apparently means scrolling through her phone all day. Dad's dipping into his pension to cover their expenses. I shook my head. They made their choice. Mom came by my place yesterday, David continued. Wanted to know if I'd talk to you about helping out. Said they're overwhelmed. I bet they are. The next day, Mom showed up at my door unannounced. I almost didn't recognize her. She looked older, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Please, she started before I could even speak. Just listen. No, I cut her off. You listen. You chose all of it. You chose to spoil Sarah rotten. You chose to support her when she betrayed me. You chose to let them move in. These are your choices, Mom. Live with them. And if you show up at my door again, I'm calling the police. Are we clear? She started to speak, but I cut her off again. The next time you feel overwhelmed, remember this was your choice. You chose the daughter who betrayed her sister over the one who only ever worked hard and did the right thing. Now live with it. I closed the door on her protests and blocked her number, the last family number I had left to block, besides my brother's. That night, I had dinner with Marcus, the man I'd been seeing for the past few months. He knew my story, knew about the betrayal and the aftermath. He'd never pushed, never rushed, just listened and understood. After I told him about the latest family events, he reached across the table and took my hand. Family isn't always who you're born to. Sometimes it's who you choose. I squeezed his hand back, thinking about my brothers who stood by me, about Marcus who understood me, about the life I'd built on my own terms. In the end, Sarah hadn't stolen my family, she'd just helped me see which parts of it were worth keeping. My brothers are coming over this weekend, I told him. Would you like to join us? His smile was answer enough. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace with where I was and who I had chosen to be. The drama playing out at my parents' house wasn't my problem anymore. I had my own life to live, my own family to build, and my own happiness to protect. I'm Ella Mitchell, and our family seemed perfect on paper. Mom worked at the tax service, wearing her position like a badge of honor. She'd come home each evening, briefcase stuffed with papers, talking about promotions and pension plans. Dad worked at the city administration, but his heart wasn't in it. I'd catch him sketching business plans on napkins during dinner. Think about it, Sarah, he'd say, eyes bright with excitement. A whole chain of specialty stores. We could. Stop it, James, Mom would cut him off sharply. We have stable jobs, good benefits. Why can't you be satisfied with that? I didn't understand their arguments then. To me, Dad's dreams sounded like fairy tales, full of possibility and adventure. But Mom would always shake her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then came that night. I was playing with my dolls when Mom's scream echoed through our house. What do you mean you took out a loan? Her voice was shrill, terrifying. How much? Sarah, please, I've done all the research. Are you insane? Do you want us to end up on the street? I crept to my bedroom door, peering through the crack. Mom was pacing, her face red with anger. I won't let you drag me down with you, James, I won't. The next morning, Dad was gone. Mom told me he'd moved to another city to start his business. I didn't understand why he hadn't said goodbye. Weeks turned into months. Dad's business succeeded, I knew, because Mom would stare at the alimony checks with a mixture of anger and disgust. But he never came back, never called, never tried to be part of my life. Mom threw herself into her work even more after that. She hired Elena, my nanny, who became my primary caregiver while Mom spent longer and longer hours at the office. Your mother's working hard for you, Elena would say when I asked why Mom was never home. But I knew the truth, Mom was hiding from the living reminder of Dad's success, me. She'd rather bury herself in spreadsheets and tax forms than face the daughter of the man who proved her wrong. Some nights, I'd hear her on the phone with her friends, he actually made it work. Can you believe it? But at what cost? He abandoned his own daughter. But Dad hadn't just abandoned me, Mom had pushed him away, choosing the security of her job over the uncertainty of his dreams. And now, I was paying the price for their choices, caught in the middle of their broken marriage, watching my mother retreat further into her work while my father built his empire in another city. My grandmother Marion was like a burst of color in our grayscale life. She didn't visit often, but when she did, our house came alive with her energy and warmth. Though these visits usually ended in heated arguments with Mom. "Sarah, look what you've done," Grandma would say, gesturing around our empty feeling house. "James is thriving in his business, and you've torn this family apart for what? Your pride? Don't you dare lecture me about my choices, Mom." Mom would snap back, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Stay out of my life and my decisions." I'd hide in my room during these fights, but I could still hear every word. Sometimes Grandma would come up afterward, her eyes sad but her smile warm. When I turned 7, Grandma started paying for me to attend Riverside Academy, a private school she said would give me better opportunities. Mom didn't object. I think she was just glad to have me out of the house for longer hours. As I grew older, I began to understand why Mom kept me at arm's length. Every time I got excited about a school project or showed initiative in something, I'd catch her watching me with this cold, distant look. I reminded her too much of Dad, the man who'd proved her wrong, who'd succeeded despite her predictions of failure. Mom provided for me materially. I always had clean clothes, good food, and a roof over my head. But there were never any hugs, no kisses goodnight, no I love yous. She spent her free time with friends from work, going on weekend trips and vacations without me. I stayed with Elena, my nanny, or occasionally with Grandma. I thought this was normal. I thought all mothers maintained this professional distance from their children. Until the day I went to my friend Katie's birthday party. The party was in full swing when Katie knocked over her juice. Instead of anger, her mother rushed over with a warm laugh. "Oh, sweetie, are you okay?" She hugged Katie close, kissing her forehead, helping her clean up while they giggled together. I stood frozen, watching this display of casual affection like an anthropologist observing a newly discovered tribe. Katie's mom hugged her just because. She kissed her cheek for no reason. She said, "I love you," without any special occasion prompting it. That night, I lay in bed imagining what it would be like to have a mom who hugged me, who kissed me goodnight, who wanted to spend time with me. I was hopeful when Mom started dating Robert. He'd come over for dinner, always bringing me small gifts, candy, or little toys. He seemed genuinely interested in my school stories, asking questions, and laughing at my jokes. When Mom announced they were getting married, I dared to dream that finally, I might get the family I'd seen at Katie's house. But nothing changed. Mom remained distant with me, even after the wedding. Then came the announcement of her pregnancy. "You're going to have a little sister," Robert told me, grinning widely. "Isn't that exciting?" I was 8 when Sophie was born. From the very first day, I watched in stunned silence as Mom transformed, but only for my sister. She'd coo at Sophie, shower her with kisses, hold her close just because she could. All the things I'd been starving for my entire life, Sophie received in abundance. "Look at her tiny fingers," Mom would whisper, nuzzling Sophie's neck. "Aren't they perfect?" I'd stand in the doorway of the nursery, watching Mom rock Sophie to sleep, singing lullabies I'd never heard. Sometimes, the pain in my chest was so sharp I couldn't breathe. Why could she love Sophie but not me? Was it because Sophie wasn't Dad's daughter? Because she didn't remind Mom of her mistake? The final blow came when Mom quit her job to stay home with Sophie. The same woman who'd barely spared me an hour of her time was now dedicating her entire day to my half-sister. But even with all this newfound time at home, she still had none to spare for me. "Ella, your grandmother's coming to pick you up," she'd say, not even looking up from Sophie. "I need to focus on the baby." I spent more and more time at Grandma's house. Sometimes I'd cry into my pillow there, wondering what was wrong with me, why I wasn't lovable enough. Why doesn't Mom love me like she loves Sophie? I finally asked Grandma one day. Grandma pulled me close, her voice thick with emotion. Oh, sweetheart, sometimes adults carry wounds that have nothing to do with the people they hurt. Your mother's pain about your father, she's taking it out on you, and it's not fair. The years that followed Sophie's birth were like living in a minefield. I never knew when the next explosion would come. By the time Sophie was old enough to understand the family dynamics, she'd learned to use them to her advantage with frightening precision. I was 14 when the incidents started becoming more frequent. One morning, I found my science project torn apart on my desk. But just as I wanted to scold this little rascal, she had already disappeared from the room. Mom, Sophie came running downstairs, tears streaming down her face. Ella destroyed my new dollhouse because she was jealous that Daddy bought it for me. That's not true, I was studying all evening. Sophie, tell the truth. Mom's face hardened as she looked at me. Why do you always blame your sister? Go to your room, you're grounded for 2 weeks. This became our routine. Sophie would break something, hide Mom's jewelry in my backpack, or plant Robert's missing money in my room. Each time, I'd try to defend myself, but my words fell on deaf ears. I saw her take your bracelet, Mom, Sophie would say, her voice dripping with fake concern. I didn't want to tell, but she's been stealing things. Robert would look at me with disgust. I knew we couldn't trust her. Like father, like daughter, both of them dishonest to the core. At first, I fought back. I'd cry, scream, beg them to believe me. But gradually, I learned that defending myself only made things worse. Sophie reveled in my punishments, watching with a small smirk as I was sent to my room, grounded, or had my allowance taken away. One night, I heard Mom and Robert talking in their bedroom. I'd stopped to pick up some laundry in the hallway when their voices drifted through the door. Why don't we just send her to live with your mother? Robert was saying. She's nothing but trouble. Are you kidding? Mom scoffed. James sends $3,000 in alimony every month. That's why I can afford to stay home with Sophie. Once Ella turns 18, that money stops. We need to keep her here until then. The laundry basket slipped from my hands, clothes scattering across the floor. That's when everything clicked into place. I wasn't a daughter to her, I was a meal ticket. The only reason she kept me around was my father's money. That night, I lay in bed and made a plan. I would focus on my studies, get into a good college, and escape this house forever. I started staying late at the library, taking extra classes, anything to minimize my time at home. Look at her, acting so superior with her studying, Sophie would taunt. You think you're better than us? But I didn't care anymore. Each insult, each false accusation, each punishment, they were just counting down the days until my freedom. I started keeping a calendar, marking off days until graduation, like a prisoner marking time until release. When Sophie stole Mom's expensive perfume and planted the empty bottle in my room, I accepted the punishment silently. When she took money from Robert's wallet and stuffed it in my coat pocket, I didn't even try to defend myself. Their words couldn't hurt me anymore. I was already gone in my mind, counting down the days until I could make it real. It was a Tuesday in late March, during my senior year, when everything finally came crashing down. The moment I opened our front door, the acrid smell of smoke hit my nostrils. My heart stopped. Living in this house had taught me that disaster could strike at any moment. Following the smell, I rushed down to the basement. The scene that greeted me made my blood run cold. Sophie was crouched in the corner, surrounded by burning newspapers and cardboard boxes. She had created a small bonfire, and the flames were already licking dangerously close to the wooden storage shelves. Sophie, are you insane? I screamed, lunging forward. You'll burn the house down. Without thinking, I grabbed her shoulders and yanked her away from the fire. It all happened so fast, she lost her balance, stumbled backward, and threw out her arm to break her fall. The sickening crack that followed will haunt me forever. Aita! Sophie's scream pierced the air as she clutched her arm. You hurt me. You did it on purpose. My hands shaking, I pulled out my phone and called Mom while simultaneously trying to stamp out the remaining flames. Mom, there's been an accident. Sophie's hurt. Please come home now." Everything after that happened in a blur. Mom burst through the door, took one look at Sophie cradling her arm, and rushed her to the hospital without even glancing at me. I sat on the stairs, my clothes still smelling of smoke, waiting for the axe to fall. When they returned hours later, Sophie's arm was in a cast, and Mom's face was set in stone. Without saying a word, she walked straight to my room and started pulling out my clothes, throwing them into garbage bags. "Mom, please let me explain," I begged. "Sophie was playing with fire in the basement. I was trying to save her. I can show you the..." She told me everything. Mom cut me off, her voice trembling with rage. "How you pushed her down the stairs, because you were jealous of her new school bag. How you've been threatening her for weeks." "What? That's insane. There was a fire." Sophie stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "Stop lying. You hurt me on purpose. You've always hated me." "Get out," Mom said, dragging the bags toward the front door. "Get out of my house before I call the police and have you arrested for assault. Who do you think they'll believe?" I felt the blood drain from my face. She was right. With my record of past incidents, all carefully orchestrated by Sophie, who would believe me? "I need money too." Mom laughed angrily. "Money? Your father's alimony will be paying for Sophie's medical bills. And don't even think about running to him with some made-up story. One word from you, and I'll file a police report about this assault. How would that look on your college applications?" The threat hung in the air like poison. With trembling hands, I grabbed my coat and one of the garbage bags containing my belongings. The rest of my things lay scattered across our front lawn like debris after a storm. I made my way to Grandma's house in a daze, dragging the bag behind me. When she opened the door, one look at my face told her everything she needed to know. The next few months passed in a blur of studying and college applications. When graduation day arrived, I sat among my classmates, scanning the crowd. Despite everything, a small part of me hoped to see Mom's face in the audience. But only Grandma was there, beaming with pride as I received my diploma with honors. Thanks to my grades and determination, I earned a full scholarship to State University's business school. Those 4 years were a breath of fresh air, no walking on eggshells, no false accusations, just the freedom to be myself and excel. After graduating with a degree in business management, I landed a job at a marketing firm. 8 years flew by, each one taking me further from the trauma of my childhood home. I had my own apartment, a successful career, and most importantly, peace. My only family connection was Grandma, who remained my rock through everything. Then I met David. He quite literally ran into me at a coffee shop, spilling his latte all over both of us. Instead of getting angry, we couldn't stop laughing about it. "Let me buy you a replacement coffee," he said, "and maybe a new blouse?" One coffee led to dinner led to more dates, and within 6 months, we were planning a wedding. It was a small ceremony, just us, a judge, and Grandma, who cried happy tears throughout. "You deserve this happiness, sweetheart," she whispered during our mother-daughter dance, which she had insisted on doing. David owned a chain of successful fast food restaurants across the city. One evening over dinner, he mentioned having trouble with his supply chain management. "You're great at analysis," he said. "Would you consider coming to work with me? I could use someone I trust to oversee our purchasing." I jumped at the chance. Finally, all my business training could be put to good use in a family business, a healthy one, built on trust and mutual respect. Within months of diving into the paperwork, patterns started emerging. Several suppliers were consistently overcharging while delivering subpar products. But one vendor, Fresh Fields Produce, was particularly egregious. "David, look at these numbers," I said one evening, spreading reports across our dining table. "Fresh Fields has been charging us 40% above market rate for produce that's barely making grade. And look at these delivery records, they're consistently late, affecting our inventory management." David studied the reports carefully. "This is excellent work, honey. No wonder our profit margins have been tight." I'm terminating their contract immediately. I've already researched some alternatives, I said, pulling out more documents. These 3 companies have better prices and quality ratings. As I watched David make calls to begin the process of changing suppliers, I felt a surge of pride. This was what a real partnership looked like, working together, trusting each other, building something meaningful. My phone buzzed with an unknown number while I was reviewing supplier contracts. Something made me hesitate before answering. Hello? Ella? It's Sophie. My hand tightened around the phone. 10 years of silence, and now this? What do you want? I kept my voice neutral, professional. Can't sisters catch up? Let's meet for coffee. We have so much to talk about. No, the word came out sharp and final. Say what you need to say. There was a pause, then Sophie's voice changed, dropping its fake sweetness. Fine. Your husband is about to make a huge mistake. Fresh Fields Produce? That's my fiancé's company. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Marcus and I are getting married in 3 months, Sophie continued. We'd been planning this amazing wedding, cathedral venue, designer dress, 5-star catering. But we need the income from your husband's restaurant chain to pay for it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you telling me you've been deliberately overcharging our restaurants to fund your wedding? Don't act so self-righteous, Sophie sneered. Marcus just adjusted the prices a little. We need this, Ella. You have to convince David to keep our contract. Adjusted the prices? I felt my voice rising. You're charging 40% above market rate for substandard produce. Some of it is nearly expired when it arrives. You're scamming us. It's called business, sis. Besides, you owe me. After everything you did. Everything I did? I cut her off. You mean like when you lit a fire in the basement and then got me thrown out of my home? Or all those years you planted stolen items in my room? Just talk to David, Sophie demanded. Tell him to keep our contract, or what? You'll lie about me again? I'm not that scared little girl anymore, Sophie. I won't help you defraud my husband's business to fund your dream wedding. Find another way to pay for your cathedral. You'll regret this, she spat and hung up. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. Mom. How dare you, she started without preamble. After everything this family has done for you. I actually laughed. Family? What family? The one that framed me for theft? The one that threw me out on the street with garbage bags of clothes? You ungrateful little, your sister is finally happy, finally getting married, and you're trying to ruin it. Where's your loyalty? Loyalty? My voice was steady now, calm. Let's talk about loyalty, Mom. Where was your loyalty when I needed a mother? When Sophie was framing me for theft? When I was sleeping on Grandma's couch because you chose to believe another of Sophie's lies? You broke her arm, Mom shouted. I saved her life. She was playing with fire in the basement, or did you forget that convenient detail? But you never wanted the truth, did you? You just wanted excuses to hate me because I reminded you of Dad. Don't you dare. No, you don't dare, I cut her off. You don't get to demand anything from me. The only family I have is Grandma, who actually loves me. Sophie and her fiancé can find honest ways to pay for their wedding. I won't help them steal from my husband's business. With that, I hung up. That evening, I sat with David in our living room, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. I told him everything, about Sophie, her fiancé Marcus, their scheme to fund their lavish wedding through overcharging our restaurants. David listened quietly, his face growing darker with each detail. When I finished, he reached over and took my hands in his. Honey, I'm not just canceling their contract now. I'm making sure every restaurant owner in this city knows exactly what kind of business Fresh Fields Produce runs. Are you sure? I asked. They'll probably try to cause trouble. Let them try, David said firmly. What they're doing isn't just unethical, it's fraud. And I protect what's mine, both my business and my wife. Over the next week, David shared the documentation I'd gathered with other restaurant owners in his network. The response was immediate and overwhelming. One by one, restaurants began canceling their contracts with Fresh Fields Produce. Marcus's reputation in the industry was destroyed. Then came another call from Mom. "You've gone too far," she hissed. "You're destroying your sister's future out of spite." "No, Mom. Their own dishonesty did that." "Well, let's see how you like being cut off completely," she threatened. "I'm talking to your grandmother tonight. You won't see a penny of inheritance after what you've done." I actually smiled. "Go ahead, call Grandma. I already told her everything last week." There was a pause on the other end. "That's right," I continued. "I told her about Sophie's fiancé's scam, about their attempted blackmail, about your threats. And you know what? She's already updated her will. I'm her sole heir, not that I care about the money. Unlike some people, I can build my own future without scamming others." Mom's response was a string of curses before she hung up. Weeks passed. Through the grapevine, I heard that Sophie's dream wedding had been cancelled. No cathedral, no designer dress, no five-star catering. She and Marcus had a quick ceremony at City Hall instead. Apparently, she blamed me for ruining her special day and destroying her fiancé's business. But I felt nothing but peace. For the first time in my life, I'd stood my ground against their manipulation and won. Their threats had no power over me anymore. Last week, Grandma came over for dinner. As we sat in our garden watching the sunset, she squeezed my hand. "You know, Ella," she said, "sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to have. You've built something beautiful here, a loving marriage, an honest business, a life of integrity. I'm so proud of you." I looked around at my home, my life, everything I'd built despite, or maybe because of, all the challenges they'd thrown at me. Sophie and Mom might blame me for their failures, but I know the truth. Their downfall came from their own choices, their own dishonesty, their own cruelty. As for me, I finally have what I always wanted, a real family, built on love, trust, and truth. And nothing they can do will ever take that away from me. My father, David, worked as a train driver, and my mother, Sarah, was an office secretary. They already had my brother Michael, their pride and joy, who was 5 years old when Mom found out she was pregnant with me. She discovered it late, when I was already moving inside her. They didn't want another child, one was enough, they said. "We should get rid of it," I overheard Mom telling Dad one night when I was around 6, recounting the story to him for what must have been the 100th time. "But those damn doctors said it would be risky for my health." We had no choice. I was that sickly kid, constantly battling one thing or another. Colds, flu, ear infections, you name it. Mom had to take so much time off work to stay home with me that she eventually lost her job. I remember the day she got fired. She came home, looked at me with such disdain, and said, "Well, Amber, I hope you're happy now." The only bright spot in those early years was my grandmother, my father's mother. While Mom would barely touch me when I was sick, Grandma would sweep into our house like a warm breeze, bringing soup and kisses, even when I was contagious. "Come here, my sweet girl," she'd say, wrapping me in her arms while Mom watched from the doorway, shaking her head. "Mom, you'll catch whatever she has," Dad would warn. Grandma would just laugh. "Love is the best medicine," she'd say, kissing my forehead. She helped us financially too, which was the only reason we managed to stay afloat during those years. Mom made sure I knew this, regularly reminding me how much of a burden I was on the family finances. Michael was everything I wasn't: healthy, athletic, the apple of our parents' eyes. While I spent my days in bed or at doctors' offices, he was out playing soccer, winning medals, making our parents proud. They'd beam at him during dinner, asking about his day, his friends, his dreams, while I pushed food around my plate, invisible. Then, almost like magic, when I turned 8, my health took a turn for the better. It was as if my body finally decided to cooperate. No more constant illnesses, no more missed school days, no more doctor visits. Mom was able to go back to work, though her career never recovered to what it had been before. Finally, Mom said when I made it through my first month without getting sick, "Maybe now we can have some normalcy around here." But normalcy, I would learn, didn't mean what I hoped it would. It just meant I was healthy enough to fade into the background of our family portrait, a shadow behind the golden child that was my brother. Grandma kept supporting Dad and our family, making sure we had everything we needed. But what really showed her love for us was when she set up education funds for both Michael and me. Education is the key to everything in life, Grandma would tell us during our weekend visits to her house. Her eyes would sparkle as she spoke about our future. With good education, you can achieve anything you dream of. I spent a lot of time at Grandma's house, not because my parents wanted me to bond with her, but because they wanted time alone with Michael. It became such a routine that I kept a toothbrush and pajamas at her place. "Your parents are taking Michael to his soccer tournament this weekend," Grandma would say, trying to mask the sadness in her voice. "We'll have a girls' weekend, just you and me." I remember one particular Saturday when I was watching TV at her house. Mom had called to say they'd be late picking me up because Michael's basketball game went into overtime. "They won," Grandma said after hanging up the phone. "Your brother scored the winning points." "That's nice," I mumbled, already used to hearing about Michael's achievements. "What would you like to do, sweetheart?" Grandma asked, sitting beside me. "You never talk about your interests." That's when I broke down and told her about the ice skating classes I'd been begging Mom and Dad to let me take. I'd seen the ice rink at the mall and couldn't stop thinking about gliding across that smooth, shiny surface. "Mom said they can't afford it," I explained, picking at a loose thread on my sleeve. "But they just paid for Michael's new soccer gear and basketball shoes last week." A few days later, I worked up the courage to ask about singing lessons. There was a choir at school, and the teacher said I had a nice voice. "Honey, we spend all our extra money on your brother's activities," Mom said without even looking up from her phone. "He's really showing promise in sports. We need to invest in his future." "But Grandma set up education funds for both of us," I argued. "Couldn't we use some of that?" Dad stepped in then, his voice firm. "That money is for college, Amber. Michael needs these activities for his college applications. You understand that, right?" I didn't understand, actually. I didn't understand why Michael got to try everything he wanted: soccer, basketball, swimming, track, while I sat on the sidelines. I didn't understand why they went to every single one of his games, but never asked what I might want to do. I didn't understand why being their firstborn made him so special and me so forgettable. The pattern continued through elementary school and into middle school. Every time there was a choice between Michael's activities and anything I wanted to do, Michael won. They'd sit in the bleachers cheering at his games, posting proud parent moments on social media, while I did my homework alone at Grandma's house. When Michael got accepted into the most expensive college in the next state, our parents couldn't have been prouder. Money wasn't even a question, they'd make it work, they said. After all, this was their son's future we were talking about. "We're so blessed to have such a brilliant boy," Mom gushed during his send-off party. "He's going to do amazing things." I stood in the corner, holding a plate of cake I didn't want to eat, watching them fawn over him. Dad had his arm around Michael's shoulders, both of them grinning as Mom took photos for Facebook. Then came the weekend visits. Every other weekend, like clockwork, they'd pack their bags and drive 6 hours to see him. I was never invited. So I'd stay at Grandma's house, scrolling through my phone, watching their weekend adventures unfold on social media. Photo after photo, video after video, Mom, Dad, and Michael at restaurants, at football games, exploring the city together. They looked so happy, so complete. A perfect family of 3. The captions were what hurt the most. "Weekend with our pride and joy. Best son ever. Making memories with the light of our lives. Family time with our only hope for the future." Finally, after months of this, I couldn't take it anymore. They were packing for another weekend trip to see Michael when I confronted them. "Why do you pretend I don't exist?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You never mention me in your posts. You never take me with you. It's like you wish I wasn't here." Mom barely looked up from her suitcase. "There you go again, always complaining." "I'm not complaining, I'm just..." "You should be grateful you're even here," she cut me off, her voice sharp. "Or did you forget I wanted to have an abortion?" The words hit me like a slap. Dad just stood there, checking his phone, as if Mom hadn't just said something incredibly cruel to their daughter. That's when it finally clicked. All these years, I'd been trying to find some deeper explanation for why they treated me the way they did. Maybe they were stressed about money. Maybe they were overwhelmed with 2 kids. Maybe they just didn't know how to show love to both children equally. But no. It was much simpler than that. They just didn't like me. They didn't want me. They never had, and they never would. I was the child they were forced to have, the one who ruined their perfect family of 3, the mistake they had to live with. Standing there in our living room, watching them pack for another weekend with their only child, because that's how they saw it, I felt something inside me break. But it wasn't the shattering pain I'd expected. Instead, it was like a chain snapping, freeing me from the desperate need to win their love. Michael's 20th birthday was a big production, like everything else in his life. Mom and Dad not only drove to his college town, but they also arranged to bring along his best friends from high school. They rented out an entire restaurant and planned a huge surprise party. "You'll stay at Grandma's that weekend," Mom informed me, not even pretending it was a question. "We'll be too busy with the party arrangements." I watched the whole thing unfold through the live stream on Instagram. Mom was doing her usual social media coverage, making sure to capture every moment. Michael's shocked face when he walked into the restaurant. The cheers from his college friends. The emotional speech Dad gave about his only child, making him proud every day. But something was different this time as I sat on Grandma's couch, watching it all on my phone. The familiar ache in my chest wasn't there anymore. "Would you like me to turn it off?" Grandma asked, noticing me watching the stream. "No," I replied, surprising both of us. "I'm actually okay." And I was. Somewhere along the line, the pain of being forgotten had dulled into acceptance. I still had Grandma, who showed me what real love felt like. She didn't need social media posts to prove she cared about me, she just did. 2 years later, when I was 17, Michael graduated from college and dropped the big news: he was getting married. His bride-to-be, Patricia, was 35, divorced, with 2 kids of her own. She also happened to be loaded. "Can you believe our luck?" Mom squealed during dinner the night Michael brought Patricia over. "Our son has found such a wonderful, established woman." Patricia sat at our dining table dripping in designer clothes and jewelry, while her 2 children played on expensive tablets. Michael looked at her like he'd won the lottery, which, in our parents' eyes, he had. "We're going to throw you the most amazing wedding," Dad declared, already pulling up venues on his phone. "Nothing but the best for our boy and his new family." The plans grew more extravagant by the day. Premium venue, gourmet catering, live band, ice sculptures, the works. The costs kept climbing higher and higher. One evening, after hearing them discuss flying in some famous chef for the wedding, I finally asked the question that had been nagging at me. "Where are you getting all this money from?" I asked during dinner. "This must cost a fortune." Mom and Dad exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. "That's none of your concern, Amber," Mom said dismissively, waving her hand like she was shooing away an annoying fly. "The important thing is making a good impression on Patricia. This wedding needs to be perfect." I looked down at my plate, that old familiar feeling of being an outsider in my own family washing over me again. But this time, there was something else too, a nagging suspicion that they were hiding something. Well, it was sudden. I was deep in my exam preparation when Mom called. Her voice was shaking as she told me Dad had been in a train accident. My stomach dropped. Despite everything, he was still my father. The hospital corridors were eerily quiet when I arrived. I found Dad's room easily. Mom was already there, hovering by his bedside. Dad was awake, propped up against white pillows, his face bruised but not too severely damaged. His eyes were fixed on his phone screen, thumb scrolling restlessly. "Hi, Dad," I said softly. He barely glanced up. "Has Michael called?" he asked Mom, completely ignoring my presence. "Not yet, honey," Mom replied. "I'm sure he will soon." I stood there awkwardly, feeling like an intruder in this scene. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the silence between us. Finally, Mom turned to me, her face twisted with worry, not for Dad's health, I would soon learn, but for something else entirely. "Your father made a mistake," she said bluntly. "He violated some safety protocols at work. The company's refusing to cover his medical expenses or pay any compensation." Dad shifted uncomfortably in his bed, still staring at his phone. "We need money for his treatment," Mom continued. "A lot of money." Without thinking, I blurted out, "What about my education fund? The one Grandma set up? We could use that, I don't mind. Dad's health is more important than college." I expected gratitude, or at least acknowledgement of my offer. Instead, Mom let out a sharp, bitter laugh that made me flinch. "Oh, Amber," she said, shaking her head. "That money's long gone. We used it for Michael's wedding. We needed to make an impression on Patricia's family." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, trying to process what I was hearing. They had taken my education fund and spent it on Michael's wedding. And now, "You need to get a job after graduation," Mom declared. "Take out a loan. Your father needs this treatment, and you need to help pay for it." The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I stared at my parents, these people who were supposed to love and protect me. In that sterile hospital room, surrounded by the smell of disinfectant and disappointment, I finally understood the full extent of their betrayal. "How could you spend my education money?" I demanded, my voice rising despite the hospital setting. "That wasn't yours to spend. Grandma gave it to you specifically for my future." Mom's face hardened into that familiar look of contempt I'd seen so many times before. But this time, instead of shrinking away, I stood my ground. "You have no right to demand answers from us," she spat. "None at all. You should be grateful you're even alive to ask questions. Or have you forgotten that I wanted to abort you?" The words hung in the air like poison. I'd heard them use my almost abortion against me countless times before, but this time was different. This time, they'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I ran. Past the nurse's station, down the sterile corridors, through the automatic doors, and into the parking lot. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get my phone out of my pocket. Through tears, I managed to dial Grandma's number. "Sweetheart," her warm voice came through the speaker. "What's wrong?" Everything spilled out in a rush: the accident, Dad's treatment, my stolen education fund, Mom's cruel words. As I spoke, my voice kept breaking, but Grandma listened patiently to every word. When I finished, there was a moment of silence before she spoke, her voice steely with determination I'd never heard before. "Pack your things," she said firmly. "All of them. You're moving in with me. Right now." I'm so sorry I didn't step in sooner. I drove home in a daze, pulled out my suitcases, and started throwing in everything I owned. Clothes, books, the few precious mementos I'd collected over the years. I was halfway through emptying my dresser when I heard the front door slam. "What do you think you're doing?" Mom's voice cut through the room like a knife. I didn't stop packing. "I'm leaving. I'm going to live with Grandma." "Oh no, you're not," she said, stepping between me and my suitcase. "Your father needs someone to take care of him at the hospital. I'm exhausted from all this. You need to step up and do your part." I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound that surprised even me. "My part? Michael's your precious golden child. Why isn't he here helping? Where's your perfect son now?" Mom's face crumpled slightly, and for the first time I saw something besides anger in her eyes, fear. "Michael, he can't help right now," she admitted, sinking onto my bed. "Things aren't good with Patricia. She doesn't give him any money. She just shows him off at parties like he's some trophy husband. And now," she took a shaky breath, "now she's threatening to throw him out. He has nowhere else to go. He'll have to come back home until he finds a job." "A job?" I couldn't help but scoff. "Michael's never worked a day in his life. How long do you think that will take?" "That's why we need you," Mom said, her voice taking on that manipulative tone I knew so well. "Your father needs treatment now. We can't wait for Michael to find work. You need to help us." I zipped up my suitcase with finality. "No, I'm done. You stole my education fund. You've treated me like garbage my entire life. I'm not going to take out loans to fix your mistakes. I'm not going to put my life on hold to take care of the father who never cared about me. I'm done." "Amber, you can't." "Watch me." I grabbed my suitcases, walked past her frozen figure, and headed for the door. At the threshold, I turned back one last time. "Try asking your only child for help. I'm sure he'll figure something out." The drive to Grandma's house was a blur, but with each mile, I felt lighter. By the time I pulled into her driveway, I was crying again, but this time, they were tears of relief. It took less than 3 days for my mother to turn my departure into a social media spectacle. The same Facebook account that had pretended I didn't exist for years suddenly couldn't stop talking about me. Heartbroken, her first post began. "Our youngest daughter has abandoned us in our time of need. While my husband lies in a hospital bed, she refuses to help her own parents. Instead, she's run away to live with her grandmother. How did we raise such a selfish child?" The comments started pouring in immediately. Distant relatives and family friends who'd only seen the carefully curated version of our family life were quick to condemn me. But then came the other voices, the ones who had seen the truth over the years. My cousin Emma commented, "Are you going to tell everyone how you ignored her for years? Or should I?" My Aunt Rachel chimed in, "Funny how you never mentioned Amber in your posts until you needed something from her." Then came my Aunt Lisa's post. As Mom's sister and a family law attorney, her words carried extra weight. "Sarah, I need to warn you publicly since you're ignoring my private messages. You are publicly defaming your minor daughter. Amber is 17. By law, you are still responsible for her care and well-being. The fact that she felt compelled to leave home and that you're now engaging in a social media campaign against her could attract attention from Child Protective Services. Is that what you want? Because I can assure you, if they investigate, they'll find a lot more than just these Facebook posts." Mom deleted her original post after that, but she wasn't done. She showed up at Grandma's house the next morning, barging in without knocking. "Mother," she addressed Grandma, ignoring my presence completely. "You need to talk some sense into Amber. This little rebellion has gone on long enough." Grandma set down her coffee cup with deliberate slowness. I'd never seen her look so stern. "Rebellion," she said quietly. "Is that what you call it when a child finally stands up to years of mistreatment?" "Mistreatment?" Mom scoffed. "We gave her everything." "Everything?" Grandma's voice rose slightly. "You gave everything to Michael. You spent Amber's education fund, money I specifically set aside for her future, on his wedding. A wedding that was nothing but a show to impress a woman who's now threatening to throw him out. You needed to think about both your children's futures," Grandma cut her off. "Instead, you burned through money like there was no tomorrow. Well, tomorrow's here now, isn't it? And no, I won't be paying for David's treatment." Mom left in tears, but they weren't tears of remorse, they were tears of frustration that her manipulation hadn't worked. As the door slammed behind her, Grandma reached over and squeezed my hand. Within a month of my departure, my parents were forced to sell our family home to cover Dad's medical expenses. They moved into a tiny two-bedroom apartment in a less desirable part of town, and then Michael showed up on their doorstep. Patricia had finally had enough of his lazy, entitled behavior. She'd kicked him out with nothing but his designer clothes and the expensive watch she'd bought him for their wedding. He arrived at our parents' new apartment expecting the same royal treatment he'd always received. At first, they tried to maintain the illusion. I heard through family gossip that Mom was still cooking his favorite meals and Dad was making excuses for why Michael couldn't find work right away. But reality has a way of breaking through even the strongest denial. "Did you hear? Grandma told me one morning over breakfast. Your mother finally told Michael he needs to get a job. He said they owed him a comfortable life since they'd never prepared him for the real world." They had a huge fight about it. Meanwhile, I was building my own life. I graduated high school with good grades, not that my parents noticed, and Grandma helped me enroll in the local community college's accounting program. It wasn't the prestigious university I'd once dreamed of, but it was a solid education that would lead to a stable career. I even landed an internship at a small accounting firm downtown. The pay wasn't much, but the experience was invaluable. My supervisor, Mrs. Chen, actually appreciated my attention to detail, something my parents had always dismissed as being too perfectionist. Living with Grandma was healing in ways I hadn't expected. We developed a comfortable routine: breakfast together before I headed to classes or work, dinner in the evening where we'd talk about our days. She actually listened when I spoke, asked questions about my life, celebrated my small victories. Then came the day she asked me to accompany her to her lawyer's office. "Just some paperwork I need to update," she said casually. I sat in the elegant office, trying not to fidget as her lawyer, Mr. Peterson, pulled out a document. "I'm updating my will," Grandma announced. "I want to make sure everything's properly arranged." My heart stopped as Mr. Peterson began reading. Grandma was leaving everything to me: the house, her savings, even her cherished collection of antique jewelry. "Everything. Are you sure?" I whispered when we left the office. "What about Dad and Michael?" Grandma took my hand. "Your father and brother have taken enough from you. I won't let them take anything more. This is your future I'm protecting now." I hugged her tight, fighting back tears. "I won't tell them," I promised. "Good," she smiled. "Let them figure out their own futures for once." That night, as I lay in bed in what had become my room, really my room, not just a space I occupied in someone else's house, I thought about how life had changed. My parents and Michael were struggling in their small apartment, fighting over money and blame. Mom had stopped posting on social media entirely. Dad was back at work, but demoted to a desk job. And me? I was thriving. I had a grandmother who loved me, a future I was building for myself, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly wanted. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to stay with. Sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away and build something new. Something better. My name is Maya Richardson, and I grew up watching my parents build their sports nutrition empire from the ground up. Some might think being born into a wealthy family meant a life of luxury and ease, but that couldn't be further from the truth. My parents, especially my father, made sure I understood the value of hard work from day one. I can still remember the first time Dad brought me to the office. I was 7, wearing my favorite blue dress with tiny flowers, trying to look as professional as a second grader could. "Maya," he said, setting me up at a small desk near his office, "one day, all of this might be yours. But you'll have to earn it, just like I did." Those words shaped my entire childhood. While other kids spent their summers by the pool, I was learning about inventory management and customer service. Mom sometimes worried I was missing out on being a kid, but I loved every minute of it. The company, Richardson Nutrition, became my second home. College flew by in a blur of business classes and internships at Dad's company. I worked in every department, starting from the warehouse up. No special treatment, that was our deal. The employees who'd known me since childhood watched with approval as I learned the ropes from the ground up. After graduation, I dove headfirst into my role at the company. My days were packed with meetings, reports, and strategy sessions. Dating? That was a foreign concept. My college roommate Sarah used to joke that I was married to my job. Everything changed at the company's annual holiday party. I was running late, as usual, having stayed behind to finish some quarterly reports. When I finally arrived at the venue, the party was in full swing. That's when I saw him, James Cooper, from our Denver branch. Tall, with warm brown eyes and an easy smile that made the exhaustion of my 14-hour workday melt away. "You must be Maya," he said, extending his hand. "I've heard so much about you." "All good things, I hope?" I laughed, accepting his handshake. "The best. Though they didn't mention you were beautiful." That night, we talked for hours. About work, about family, about our dreams. He seemed to understand me in a way no one else had. When he asked for my number at the end of the night, my heart did a little flip. After James returned to Denver, we started messaging each other constantly. Every morning started with his "good morning, beautiful" text, and every night ended with long conversations about our days. It felt like I'd known him forever. One night, after a particularly long video call, I took a leap. "Why don't you transfer to the main office? We could be together, and it would be great for your career." There was a pause on his end. "Maya, I can't. My family's here in Denver. My parents, my sister, my nephew, we're really close. I couldn't leave them." My heart sank a little, but then he added, "But why don't you come here? The Denver branch could use someone with your expertise." I sat with that thought for a day before approaching Dad in his office. "Daddy, I need your advice. What would you think about me transferring to the Denver branch?" I watched his face carefully as I explained about James. To my surprise, Dad just smiled. "I've been wondering when you'd ask. James has a good reputation in the company, and the Denver branch could use strong leadership. If this is what you want, I'll make it happen." 2 weeks later, I was standing in James's apartment in Denver, surrounded by moving boxes. "Welcome home," he said, wrapping his arms around me. I felt like I was exactly where I should be. The first meeting with his family came sooner than I expected. They all lived together in a modest 2-story house, his parents, Tom and Linda, his sister Rachel, and her teenage son Kyle. I was nervous as we pulled up to their house. "Your family must have a mansion," Linda said the moment I walked in. "This must seem so simple to you." I felt my cheeks flush. "Oh no, not at all. We've always lived pretty normally. No mansions or private jets, just a regular house." "But surely with your family's wealth," Tom started. "I've worked for everything since I was a kid," I explained. "Dad believed in earning your way. I'm more comfortable with simple things, honestly." I caught the disappointed looks they exchanged, but tried to ignore them. Rachel, James's sister, just looked me up and down, eyeing my simple sweater and jeans. "If I had your money, I wouldn't be caught dead in anything but designer labels," she said with a smirk. I just shrugged, not knowing how to respond. James squeezed my hand under the table, but said nothing to defend me. 2 months later, James proposed during a walk in the park. It wasn't elaborate, just us, a simple ring, and a heartfelt question. I said yes immediately. When it came to wedding planning, we had our first real disagreement. James wanted something extravagant, a huge venue, hundreds of guests, all the trimmings. "Babe, we don't need all that," I argued. "Let's do something small and meaningful." He eventually gave in, though not happily. We had a modest ceremony with just immediate family present. But I couldn't help overhearing Linda during the reception, whispering to her sister, "I expected something much grander from someone with her background. All this, it's so plain." I pretended not to hear, but their words stung more than I wanted to admit. The ink had barely dried on our marriage certificate when the questions about housing started. We were having Sunday dinner at Tom and Linda's when they brought it up. It was a typical family gathering, Rachel texting on her phone, Cal playing video games in the corner, and Tom watching sports on TV while we ate. "So, Maya," Linda said, passing the mashed potatoes, "have you talked to your father about buying you two a house? Something in the Cherry Creek area would be perfect. I was just looking at listings there yesterday. There's this beautiful 5-bedroom with a pool." I nearly choked on my water. "Actually, we're planning to save up and buy our own place." The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel's fork stopped midway to her mouth. Tom muted the TV and turned to stare at me. Linda's face froze in that artificial smile I was beginning to recognize all too well. They exchanged loaded glances that made me feel like I'd said something terribly wrong. "But surely your father wouldn't mind." Tom started, wiping his mouth with his napkin. "I mean, it's just natural for parents to help their children get started. Especially when they're so capable." I cut him off firmly but politely, sitting up straighter in my chair. "James and I want to do this on our own. We're both working, and we can save up. I believe in earning what you have." James reached for my hand under the table, his palm slightly sweaty. "I support Maya on this," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Besides, my apartment is perfectly fine for now. I've been renting it for years, and it's in a great location." Linda's eyes lit up suddenly, like she'd just had a brilliant idea. She set down her wine glass with a little too much force. "Well, if you're staying in the apartment, Maya should pay the rent. After all, she makes quite a bit more than you do, James. It's only fair." I watched as my husband nodded in agreement, a little too quickly for my comfort. "That makes sense," he said, not meeting my eyes. "It's $3,000 a month." The amount took me by surprise. Denver wasn't cheap, but that seemed high for our neighborhood. Still, I didn't want to create waves. The tension in the room was already thick enough to cut with a knife. "Sure, that's fair," I said, trying to keep my voice light. So our routine was established. Every month, I'd give James $3,000, and he'd handle the rent payment. Sometimes I'd see him making the transfer on his phone, always quick to close the screen if I walked by. It went on like this for a while until one day, a thought occurred to me while I was reviewing our monthly expenses. "Hey," I said one evening while we were having dinner in our kitchen, the sounds of the city drifting in through the open window, "since I'm paying the rent now, maybe I should take over the lease? We could put it in my name. It would make sense for tax purposes." James's reaction was immediate and strange. He tensed up, nearly dropping his fork onto his half-eaten pasta. His face paled slightly. "No, that wouldn't work," he said quickly, his voice higher than usual. "I've been renting from Mr. Johnson for years. He trusts me. We don't want to mess with a good thing." Something about his reaction bothered me deeply. The way his eyes wouldn't quite meet mine, the slight tremor in his hands as he reached for his water glass. But I pushed the feeling aside, like I'd been doing with so many little things lately. Life in Denver had fallen into a routine. I was settling into my role at the branch office, managing my team, and having weekly video calls with Mom and Dad. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. But there was one issue that kept gnawing at me. It happened for the first time on a Tuesday. I came home from work early with a headache, only to find Linda and Rachel sitting on my couch, watching my TV, eating the expensive salmon I'd bought for James's birthday dinner. "Oh, Maya," Linda said, not even getting up. "We were just having a little snack." I stood there, key still in hand, staring at them. They had their shoes up on my coffee table, magazines scattered everywhere, and my kitchen looked like a tornado had hit it. This became a regular occurrence. I'd come home to find them there, or worse, come home to evidence they'd been there, empty food containers, things moved around, my closet clearly rifled through. They had keys. Of course they had keys. One evening, I tried talking to James about it. "Honey, don't you think it's a bit strange that your mom and sister just come in whenever they want?" He barely looked up from his phone. "They're family, Maya." "You're being dramatic, just calm down." But I couldn't calm down. Not when I found them going through my personal papers one afternoon, giggling over my diary from college that they'd discovered in a box I hadn't unpacked yet. "We need to talk," I said firmly, my hands shaking slightly. "This isn't okay. You can't just come into our home without asking. You can't go through our things." Linda's face crumpled instantly. Tears sprang to her eyes like someone had turned on a faucet. "How dare you," she wailed. "After everything we've done to welcome you into our family. I knew you were too good for us, with your fancy background." As if on cue, James walked in. He took in the scene, his mother sobbing, Rachel glaring at me, and me standing there in shock. "What did you do?" he demanded, rushing to his mother's side. "She's trying to keep us away from you," Linda cried into his shoulder. "She says we're not welcome here anymore." "That's not what I started, but James cut me off. How could you treat them like this? They're my family." After they left, James turned on me. His face was hard in a way I'd never seen before. "You need to fix this," he said. "Buy them something nice, really nice, and apologize." The next day, I went shopping after work. I bought Linda a designer handbag she'd been hinting about, and Rachel a pair of expensive boots. My hands felt dirty as I wrapped them. When I delivered the gifts to their house, they accepted them with smug smiles. "We knew you'd come around," Linda said, not even looking at me as she examined the handbag. "These will do," Rachel added, trying on the boots. That night, James finally spoke to me again. "See, was that so hard?" he asked, kissing my cheek. But something had changed. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on yet. After the boundary incident, things got worse in ways I hadn't imagined possible. Linda and Rachel turned gift demanding into an art form. Every minor holiday became an occasion for expectations. "Maya, you know it's National Sisters' Day next week," Rachel would text. "I saw this beautiful Gucci bag. It's the anniversary of when I first held James as a baby," Linda would announce. "I think a spa weekend would be appropriate to mark the occasion." The requests were endless: Mother's Day, birthday, Christmas, Easter, Valentine's Day, Labor Day, Memorial Day, even Groundhog Day became an excuse. When I hesitated about buying Linda a $500 scarf for Arbor Day, she burst into tears during family dinner. "I guess some people just don't understand family loyalty," she sniffled, while Rachel patted her back. "Even after we've welcomed her so warmly." "Maya," James said later that night, "why do you have to be so difficult? They're your family now too." "But James, don't you think this is getting out of hand? Last week, your mom wanted a designer watch because it was National Ice Cream Day." He just shrugged. "If you can afford it, why not help family?" As if the situation wasn't stressful enough, Kyle, Rachel's 15-year-old son, started showing up at our apartment more frequently. At first, I tried to be understanding. All teenagers go through difficult phases, right? But Kyle took teenage attitude to new heights. One evening, I spent hours making my grandmother's special lasagna recipe. Kyle took one bite and pushed the plate away. "This is garbage," he declared. "Mom says you probably can't cook because you grew up with servants doing everything for you." I gripped my fork tighter. "Kyle, that's not appropriate." "Whatever," he cut me off. "I need $60 for the movies with my friends." When I refused, he kicked the kitchen chair. "You're loaded. Stop being such a miser. Mom says you're just playing poor to feel superior." That night, I tried talking to James about Kyle's behavior. We were getting ready for bed, and I was hoping he'd finally see reason. "Honey, Kyle was really disrespectful today. Could you maybe talk to him?" James didn't even look up from his phone. "You need to handle it yourself. Think of it as practice. We'll have our own kids someday. You need to learn how to deal with these situations." The next day, Kyle showed up again, loudly demanding money for a new video game. When I said no, he sprawled across our couch, turned the TV volume up to maximum, and started making pointed comments about fake humble rich people. I looked at my husband, hoping for support, but he just walked out of the room, leaving me alone with his smirking nephew. In that moment, standing in my own living room while a teenager openly disrespected me, I felt more alone than I ever had before. 2 years. It's amazing how much can change in 2 years. Or maybe how much you can convince yourself that things will get better if you just try hard enough, be patient enough, give enough. I'm going to visit Mom and Dad this weekend, I told James over breakfast one morning. Want to come? He barely glanced up from his phone. Can't. Promised Mom and Dad I'd help them with some stuff around the house. The drive to my parents' house was peaceful. Mom made my favorite lasagna, Dad told his terrible dad jokes, and for a few hours, I felt like myself again. Like the Maya who used to know exactly who she was and what she wanted. But life has a way of shattering peace into a million pieces. When I opened the door to our apartment Sunday evening, the stench hit me first, stale beer and pizza, and something worse. Empty cans littered every surface. Cigarette butts floated in half-empty Solo cups. Pizza boxes made a greasy tower on my coffee table. And there, sprawled across my living room like they owned it, were Kyle and 5 other teenagers, passed out among the wreckage of what had clearly been one hell of a party. Get up, I shouted, my voice shaking with rage. All of you, out. Now. The teenagers startled awake, scrambling to gather their things. All except Kyle, who stretched lazily and looked at me with that familiar smirk. Why should I leave? I live here now. I felt my blood pressure rising. Excuse me? Had a fight with Mom and Grandma, he said, reaching for a half-empty beer can. Decided this was better than their rules. Uncle James said I could crash here. We rent this apartment, we may have problems, I said through gritted teeth, give me your keys. Now. Kyle laughed. Actually laughed. Rent this apartment? That's funny. This is Uncle James's apartment. Has been since Great-Grandpa left it to him. The room started spinning. What are you talking about? The apartment. It's his. Always has been. Got it when Great-Grandpa died 5 years ago. Everyone knows that. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. 2 years of rent payments. Every time I'd suggested putting the lease in my name, every time he'd dodged the question, every time he'd quickly hidden his phone when making the rent transfer. It had all been a lie. I must have looked like I was about to collapse, because Kyle's whole demeanor changed. The cocky teenager disappeared, replaced by someone who looked almost sympathetic. Look, he said, awkwardly patting my shoulder, there's something else you should know. He pulled out his phone, fidgeting with it. I'd been recording some of their conversations. Started doing it when they were talking shit about me, but, well, they talk about you a lot too. James's laugh came through the speaker first. That laugh I used to love. It's perfect, he was saying. $3,000 a month, straight into my pocket. She doesn't even question it. My stomach churned as Kyle played recording after recording. Each one worse than the last. Keep talking about family loyalty, Rachel was saying. She'll cave every time. Got a new Prada bag out of her last week. Just make sure you get her pregnant soon, Linda's voice again. Once there's a baby, her daddy will have to buy you two a house. No way he'll let his grandchild live in an apartment. But the worst was yet to come. Kyle hesitated before playing the next one. She's such an idiot, James's voice, slightly slurred. Can't even satisfy me in bed. Thank God for Amanda, and Julie. And what's her name from accounting? Just be careful, honey, Linda again. Don't let Maya catch you. At least not until we've squeezed every penny we can out of her. The phone slipped from my numb fingers. Kyle caught it. Could you? My voice cracked. Could you send those to me? He nodded, quickly tapping on his phone. I heard the notification sounds on mine as the files came through. Kyle stood up, gathering his things. At the door, he turned back. I'm sorry, he said quietly. They're all snakes, you know? Always have been, even Mom. He shrugged. Guess that's why they hate me so much. I can't pretend like they do. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone in the trashed apartment. Alone with the truth about my marriage. About my husband. About the past 2 years of my life. I didn't bother cleaning up the mess in the apartment. Let it be a perfect metaphor for my marriage, a beautiful facade hiding absolute garbage underneath. Instead, I got in my car and drove straight to Linda and Tom's house, where I knew they'd all be having their Sunday family dinner. They were all there, exactly as I'd pictured them: James, Linda, Tom, and Rachel, gathered around the dining table like some Norman Rockwell painting of family unity. The scene made me sick. "Maya." Linda's fake smile appeared instantly. "We weren't expecting you. How was your parents' house?" I ignored her completely, fixing my eyes on James. "Show me the rental agreement for our apartment." The room went silent. James's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "What?" "The rental agreement. The lease. Show it to me." He recovered quickly, plastering on that charming smile I'd once loved. "Oh, honey, you know Mr. Johnson doesn't do formal contracts. We've known each other for years." "Mr. Johnson doesn't exist," I cut him off. "The apartment belongs to you. Always has." Linda jumped in quickly, her voice high and nervous. "Maya, dear, would you like some pot roast? I tried that recipe you mentioned." "Shut up, Linda." My voice was ice cold. They all stared at me in shock. I'd never spoken to any of them like that before. "James, what have you been doing with my $3,000 every month for the past 2 years?" He chuckled, but I could see sweat breaking out on his forehead. "Come on, Maya, it's not a big deal. So I own the apartment, what difference does it make? We're married." "What difference?" I pulled out my phone. "Let's see what difference it makes." The color drained from their faces as James's voice filled the room. "It's perfect. $3,000 a month, straight into my pocket. She doesn't even question it." I played recording after recording. Their own voices condemned them. The plotting, the manipulation, the mockery. James's boasts about his mistresses. Linda and Rachel's schemes for extracting gifts. Their plans for getting me pregnant to secure more money from my father. When I finally stopped the playback, you could have heard a pin drop. James was ghost white. Rachel looked like she might throw up. Linda's carefully maintained makeup couldn't hide her terror. "I'm divorcing you," I said to James, my voice steady. "Expect the papers this week. If you try to contact me for anything other than the divorce proceedings, these recordings go public. I'm sure the business community would love to hear how you scammed your wife out of $72,000. I turned and walked out, their protests falling on deaf ears. I drove back to the apartment, his apartment, and packed my things methodically, efficiently. By sunset, my car was loaded, and I was on my way to my parents' house. Mom and Dad were still up when I arrived. One look at my face, and they knew something was terribly wrong. I told them everything, showing them the recordings. Dad's face grew darker with each revelation. "I'll handle this," he said when I finished, and he did. James was fired the next day, and Dad made sure his reputation in the business world was thoroughly destroyed. The divorce proceedings were quick. James tried to fight it at first, but the recordings changed everything. The judge was particularly interested in the financial fraud aspect. James walked away with nothing but his apartment and his ruined reputation. 3 months later, I was back at headquarters, throwing myself into work, slowly rebuilding my life. That's when I got a text from Kyle. We met for coffee. He looked different, more mature, less angry. "I got a job at the car wash," he told me. "Moved out of Mom's house after they found out I was the one who gave you the recordings. Best decision I ever made." "I could help you," I offered. "Get you a position at the company." He shook his head, smiling slightly. "Thanks, but I need to do this on my own. Clean slate, you know? Besides, I'm saving up for community college." I understood completely. Sometimes the only way forward is to leave everything behind and build something new, something true, from the ground up. That night, I stood in my new apartment, my actual rental, with a real lease in my name, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same person who fell for James's charm 2 years ago. She was stronger, wiser, and finally, genuinely free. I picked up my phone and deleted their numbers one by one. The last light of day caught the diamond on my ring finger, my grandmother's ring now, not the one James had given me, and scattered into 1,000 points of light. Outside my window, the city was coming alive with evening energy, full of possibilities and new beginnings. I was ready for mine. From the moment I could understand things, it was clear that my older brother Tommy was the golden child, and I was just there. The girl, the afterthought. "Nicole, make sure you're home by 3:30 to help your brother with his lunch," Mom would say almost every morning before school. I was 12, Tommy was 15, and apparently, making a sandwich was too difficult for the family prodigy. "But Mom, I wanted to join the art club after school," I'd plead, knowing it was useless. "Your brother has football practice. He needs proper nutrition. You know how important that is for him." She'd give me that look, the one that said the discussion was over before it began. Meanwhile, Tommy would be sprawled on the couch, his latest iPhone in hand, a birthday gift that made my hand-me-down flip phone feel like a relic from another century. "Yeah, Nikki," he'd smirk, not even looking up from his screen, "be a good sister." Dad was even worse about it. "Nicole, this is good practice for when you're a wife," he'd say, as if that was the pinnacle of what I could aspire to. A woman needs to know how to take care of her family. Every day was the same routine. I'd rush home from school, throw together whatever Tommy wanted to eat, iron his clothes for the next day, and try to squeeze in my homework between chores. While I was doing all this, Tommy would be at one of his many after-school activities: football, debate club, computer programming classes. Mom and Dad made sure he had every opportunity available. The only person who seemed to see me, really see me, was Grandma Rose. Her old Victorian house on the other side of town became my sanctuary. Every weekend I'd bike over there, pedaling fast through the tree-lined streets until I saw her distinctive wraparound porch come into view. "There's my girl," she'd call out from her garden, her silver hair gleaming in the sun. Inside her house, there was no hierarchy, no golden child. Just warmth, cookies, and the kind of love that didn't come with conditions. Grandma Rose's house was like something out of an old movie, all creaky floorboards, carved wooden banisters, and rooms full of fascinating treasures. Sure, the wallpaper was peeling in places, and some of the windows stuck when you tried to open them, but I loved every imperfect inch of it. It felt more like home than our pristine suburban house ever did. What made it special wasn't just the building itself, but how Grandma treated us when we were there. Whether it was Christmas, birthdays, or just a regular weekend visit, Tommy and I always got the same treatment. Same size cookies, same loving hugs, same thoughtful gifts. It drove Tommy absolutely crazy. I'll never forget the day it all came to a head. It was Tommy's 16th birthday, and Grandma had gotten us both new tablets, nice ones, but identical. Tommy took one look at his and exploded. "Are you kidding me?" He stood up, face red with anger. "Nicole gets the exact same thing as me? On my birthday?" Grandma Rose sat calmly in her antique armchair, hands folded in her lap. "Tommy, dear, I love you both equally. But that's not fair," he was practically shouting now. "Mom and Dad always give me better stuff. They know I deserve it. I'm the one with the grades, the sports achievements, the future. Nicole just exists." I felt like I'd been slapped, but before I could say anything, Grandma Rose stood up. She wasn't a tall woman, but in that moment, she seemed to tower over all of us. Thomas Michael Parker, her voice was quiet but sharp as a knife. "You will not speak about your sister that way in my house. Or anywhere else, for that matter. I will not allow it." Tommy stormed out, slamming the front door so hard that Grandma's collection of china teacups rattled in their cabinet. I expected that to be the end of it, but it wasn't. The next day, Grandma showed up at our house unannounced. I sat at the top of the stairs, listening to her talking to Mom and Dad in the living room. Her voice carried clearly, "The way you're raising these children is unacceptable. The favoritism needs to stop." "Mom, we're doing what's best for both of them," my mother tried to argue. "Really? Is that what you call it?" Grandma's voice was cold. "Well, if you want my continued financial support for their upbringing, things need to change." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Later that night, I overheard Mom and Dad talking in their bedroom. "We can't afford to lose her money," Mom was saying. "We need it for Tommy's college fund, for all his activities." "I know," Dad sighed. "We'll have to play along. Give Nicole some stuff too. Keep your mother happy." Suddenly, everything changed. Within a week, I was enrolled in the piano lessons I'd been begging for since I was 10. A new iPhone appeared on my bedside table. My parents started asking about my day at dinner. The next time I visited Grandma, she was tending to her roses in the garden. She looked up at me with a knowing smile. "You know, dear," she said, pruning shears in hand, "I get detailed reports of how every penny of my support money is spent. Your parents seem to be making much better choices lately, don't you think? It's a strange feeling when you realize your parents' love comes with conditions." Yes, they were going through the motions, asking about my day, buying me things, showing up at my school events, but their hearts weren't in it. Their eyes would still light up differently when Tommy walked into the room. I learned to accept it. At least now I had my piano lessons and didn't have to spend every afternoon being Tommy's personal maid. Sometimes acceptance is easier than hoping for change. When Tommy graduated high school and got accepted to State University 3 hours away, you'd think he'd won the Nobel Prize. Mom and Dad threw this huge party, invited all the relatives, made speeches about their brilliant son. Grandma Rose sat in the corner, watching it all with those knowing eyes of hers. For the first few months, all we heard during family dinners was how well Tommy was doing at college. He'd call home weekly, telling stories about his classes, his professors, his bright future in business. Mom and Dad would put him on speakerphone, beaming with pride. Then came the letter. I was in my senior year of high school when Dad stormed into the house waving an official-looking envelope, his face purple with rage. Tommy was on academic probation, at risk of being expelled. Turns out all those study sessions he'd been talking about were actually parties. He'd barely attended any classes. Grandma Rose showed up the next day. I'd never seen her so angry. "If you don't get that boy in line," she told my parents, her voice like steel, "don't expect me to pay for another college when he gets himself kicked out of this one. And believe me, no other school will take him with these grades." The threat of losing Grandma's money sent my parents into a panic. They drove to State University that very weekend. I don't know exactly what they said to Tommy, but when he called the following week, he sounded different. Subdued. For once in his life, Tommy had to face actual consequences. By some miracle, Tommy managed to pull his grades up enough to stay in school. He graduated 4 years later and decided to stay in that city, taking a job at a local company. Meanwhile, I'd gotten into the business management program at City College, just 20 minutes from home. Grandma Rose paid my tuition too, though my parents barely seemed to notice I was in college at all. When I made the dean's list, the only celebration was a phone call with Grandma. 4 years flew by, and suddenly I was graduating with honors. Grandma was there, of course, beaming proudly. My parents showed up too, though they spent most of the ceremony talking about how Tommy was doing at his new job. I didn't care anymore. I had my degree, and better yet, I had a job offer from Parker and Associates, one of the biggest marketing firms in town. When Grandma Rose passed away, it felt like the world stopped spinning for a while. The day of her funeral, I couldn't stop staring at her garden, wondering who would tend to her beloved roses now. The reading of the will was held in her attorney's office, a week after the funeral. Tommy flew in from out of state, wearing an expensive suit that somehow still made him look like a kid playing dress-up. Mom and Dad sat between us, as if they were still needed as buffers after all these years. Mrs. Rose Parker's estate, the attorney began, adjusting his glasses, is to be divided between her two grandchildren, Nicole and Thomas Parker. He paused, looking at both of us. The division is to be determined by their own choice. One will receive the house, and the other will receive a sum of $500,000. The first choice goes to Thomas, as the elder grandchild. Tommy actually snorted. Is this some kind of joke? He looked around the room. You really expect me to want that musty old house? No, I'll take the money, I've got plans. I'm going to start my own business, show everyone what I can do. Nicole can have the old lady house with all its weird smells and creaky floors. I sat there, my heart pounding. The house, Grandma's house. My sanctuary all those years. I'll take it, I said quietly, but firmly. The next few years passed in a blur of hard work and determination. At Parker & Associates, I threw myself into every project, every challenge. My team's sales numbers kept breaking records, and within 3 years, I was promoted to head of sales. The salary increases that came with my success went straight into renovating Grandma's house. I took my time with the renovation, carefully preserving the house's character while modernizing everything else. New wiring, new plumbing, a state-of-the-art kitchen that still somehow felt like it belonged in a Victorian home. The garden I did myself, learning everything I could about roses, and continuing Grandma's legacy. Mom and Dad came to visit once it was done. I watched their faces as they walked through the restored rooms, saw how their eyes widened at the crown molding, the hardwood floors, the gourmet kitchen. This is incredible. Mom ran her hand along the marble countertop. Dad nodded, then sighed. It's a shame Tommy didn't take the house. This would have been perfect for him and his new wife. And there it was. Some things never change. Speaking of which, Mom added, trying to sound casual, have you heard from your brother lately? I hadn't, of course. None of us had been invited to his wedding 6 months ago. He'd gotten married in his wife's hometown, surrounded by her family and their mutual friends. Mom had shown me pictures she'd found on Facebook, Tommy in a tux, his new wife Rebecca beaming in designer white. The doorbell rang on a Sunday afternoon while I was pruning Grandma's roses. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I took my time wiping the dirt from my hands before heading to the door. When I opened it, I nearly dropped my gardening gloves. There stood Tommy, looking nothing like the confident businessman he'd been pretending to be on social media. Beside him stood a woman I recognized from the wedding photos, Rebecca, his wife. She wore designer clothes and too much makeup, her eyes scanning my home like she was conducting an inspection. Tommy gave me an apologetic look. Can we talk privately for a minute, Nikki? We stepped into Grandma's old study, now my home office. Tommy closed the door behind us and turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before, desperation. I need your help, sis, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The business, it's not good. We're about to lose everything. We had to give up our apartment, and... He ran his hands through his hair. Could we stay here for a while? Just until things turn around? I stood there, stunned. Tommy had never asked me for anything before, unless you count all those years of demanded lunches and ironed clothes. Please, he added, and for the first time since we were kids, I saw my brother instead of my parents' golden child. Okay, I heard myself say. But just temporarily. The next morning, my doorbell rang again. This time it was Mom and Dad, practically bouncing with excitement. We came as soon as Tommy told us. Mom rushed past me to embrace Rebecca. Oh, sweetheart, we're so happy to finally meet you in person. For the next 2 hours, I might as well have been invisible. I served coffee, at Mom's imperious request, and listened as Rebecca charmed my parents with stories about her family's social connections and Tommy's brilliant business ventures. Nicole, Mom called out as I headed to the kitchen, be a dear and make us some lunch. Something nice, Rebecca's used to fine dining. That set the tone for the weeks that followed. I'd come home from long days at work to find Tommy and Rebecca lounging in my living room, expecting dinner to magically appear. "Aren't you going to start cooking?" Rebecca asked one evening, not looking up from her phone. "We're starving." "I just worked a 12-hour day," I replied, dropping my briefcase. "Why don't you cook something?" Rebecca's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "Excuse me? You should be grateful we let you stay here at all. The least you could do is cook decent meals." I turned to Tommy, confused. He pulled me into the study again. "Look," he whispered urgently, "Rebecca thinks this is my house. She thinks I'm letting you stay here out of kindness. She comes from money, she's used to a certain lifestyle. If she finds out I'm basically bankrupt," his voice cracked, "she'll leave me." I stared at my brother, this man who'd had everything handed to him his whole life, now reduced to begging me to lie to his wife. "Fine," I said finally. "I won't tell her. But you two need to start treating me with respect in my own home. No more demands, no more attitude. Deal?" "Deal," Tommy nodded quickly. "Thank you, Nikki. I mean it." True to his word, Tommy's demands for home-cooked meals stopped. Instead, I'd come home to find takeout containers from the city's finest restaurants scattered across my kitchen counter. Rebecca would be lounging on my sofa, picking at pad thai or sushi, barely acknowledging my presence. I didn't ask questions. Honestly, I was just relieved not to be playing chef after long days at the office. I settled into my own routine, grabbing dinner from the casual cafe near work. The arrangement seemed to be working. They stayed out of my way, I stayed out of theirs. Then came the phone call. "Nicole?" Mom's voice had that tone, the one she used when she was about to demand something. "We need to discuss the restaurant bills. Tommy told us you'd cover the expenses at the end of the month. It's nearly $3,000. I nearly choked on my coffee. "Excuse me?" "Well, you can't expect them to starve," Mom continued, as if this was the most reasonable thing in the world. "Tommy said you agreed to handle their food expenses since they're going through a rough patch. I've been putting it all on my credit card. I'll text you the account details for the transfer." I hung up. My hands were shaking as I pulled up my text messages and sent one to Tommy. "Come to me, now." He must have heard something in those two words, because he appeared in my study within 15 minutes. Rebecca was out shopping, with whose money, I didn't want to know. "Care to explain why Mom thinks I'm paying for your 5-star takeout habit?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Tommy's face did that thing it used to do when we were kids, and he got caught in a lie, a quick flash of guilt before the excuses started flowing. "Nikki, you have to understand." "Understand what?" "That you're stealing from our parents now too?" "I'm not stealing." He ran his hands through his hair. "I just borrowed. I was going to pay them back when things turned around. But Rebecca, she has certain expectations. If she knew how bad things really are." "Stop," I held up my hand. "I've heard enough about Rebecca's expectations. This ends now." "I'll figure something out," he promised, his eyes pleading. "Just give me more time. Don't tell Rebecca, please, Nikki." "I've never asked you for anything." "Never asked me for anything?" I stood up, my voice rising. "Are you kidding me? My entire childhood was spent catering to your needs. And now you're living in my house, lying to your wife, and scamming our parents." I know, he held up his hands. "I'm sorry, really. Just one more chance. I'll handle the restaurant bills. I promise." I stared at my brother, this man who had everything handed to him his whole life, now reduced to begging his little sister to keep his house of cards from collapsing. "Fine," I said finally. "One more chance. But I mean it, Tommy. Figure out your own food situation. And I'm not paying a cent of those bills." Life fell into an uncomfortable routine over the next 2 months. I'd go to work, manage my department, come home to find my house looking like a hurricane had swept through it, and spend my evenings cleaning up after Tommy and Rebecca. They seemed to exist in their own bubble of leisure, lunches with our parents, dinners at expensive restaurants, shopping trips I didn't want to know the details of. Then came the day that changed everything. Tommy had left early, muttering something about a business meeting. I came home from work earlier than usual, having wrapped up a major sales presentation, looking forward to a quiet evening with a glass of wine. Rebecca was waiting for me in the living room, perched on the edge of the sofa like a queen about to deliver a royal decree. "We need to talk," she announced, gesturing to the armchair across from her. "Sit." I raised an eyebrow at her tone, but sat down anyway. Might as well hear whatever this was about. "I've been patient," Rebecca began, examining her manicured nails. "I've watched you swagger around this house like you own the place, making everyone uncomfortable. But enough is enough." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "From now on, you'll pay us $2,000 a month in rent. That's more than fair, given the neighborhood." She smiled tightly. "And you'll resume cooking and cleaning duties. The state of this house is embarrassing, and since you're the tenant..." I couldn't help it. I started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but full-blown, tears in my eyes laughter. Rebecca's face darkened. "What exactly is so amusing?" I wiped my eyes, trying to catch my breath. "Rebecca, honey, there seems to be a misunderstanding. This is my house, I own it. Your husband is living here because I took pity on him when he came begging at my door." The color drained from her face. "You're lying." "Call him," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Go ahead. Ask Tommy who owns this house." Her hands shaking slightly, Rebecca pulled out her phone and dialed. Tommy answered on the second ring. "Darling," her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Nicole is spinning some ridiculous story about owning the house. Tell her she's mistaken." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "She's telling the truth," Tommy's voice crackled through the speaker. "It's her house. Grandma left it to her in the will. I took the money instead to start a business, but I failed. We're broke. I've been trying to find a way to tell you." Rebecca stood up so fast she knocked over her water glass. I watched as she stormed upstairs, heard drawers slamming, closet doors banging. Within 20 minutes, she was dragging her designer suitcases down my stairs. She didn't say a word as she left. The slam of the front door echoed through the house like a gunshot. The morning after Rebecca left, I was enjoying my coffee in peaceful silence when Tommy burst through the front door. His face was twisted with rage, all traces of yesterday's contrition gone. "This is all your fault," he shouted, stalking into my kitchen. "Rebecca's filing for divorce. She won't even talk to me. You had no right to tell her the truth." I set my coffee cup down carefully, remembering all the times I'd backed down from his anger over the years. Not this time. "No, right?" I stood up slowly. "This is my house, Tommy. The house you laughed at me for choosing. The house you said smelled like an old lady. The house you've been lying about to your wife while mooching off our parents. And you're telling me I had no right? You ruined everything." He slammed his fist on my counter. "You've always been jealous of me, haven't you? Always waiting for a chance to get back at me. Get out." My voice was quiet but firm. "Take your things and go." He stared at me for a moment, then stormed upstairs. I listened to him throwing things around in the guest room, probably breaking something expensive. I didn't care. When he came back down with his bags, he gave me one last venomous look. I had exactly 1 hour of peace before my phone rang. Mom's name flashed on the screen. "How could you do this to your brother?" She didn't even say hello. "He's devastated. He's back home with us now, crying his eyes out." "That's not my problem." "Of course it's your problem." Dad's voice now, they had me on speaker. "You need to give Tommy the house. It's the only way to save his marriage. Rebecca might come back if they have a proper home." I actually laughed. "Are you serious? You want me to give away my house because Tommy lied to his wife and ruined his business?" "He's your brother. Mom was practically shrieking now. Family helps family. Really? I felt a lifetime of resentment bubbling up. Where was that family spirit when I was cooking and cleaning for Tommy as a kid? Where was it when you ignored my achievements because you were too busy praising him? The only person who ever treated me like family was Grandma, and she left this house to me. This conversation is over. 2 months later, I heard through work colleagues that Tommy's company had officially declared bankruptcy. His divorce was finalized around the same time. He was living with our parents, apparently regrouping, their favorite word for Tommy's failures. I wasn't surprised when all three of them showed up at my door one Sunday afternoon. Mom was clutching a casserole dish like a peace offering. Dad had that stern look he used to use when he was about to lecture me about family duty. Tommy stood behind them, trying to look pitiful. I watched them through the security camera Grandma had installed years ago. They rang the bell again and again. Mom started calling out, "Nicole, we know you're in there. We need to talk about this as a family." I picked up my phone and sent a single text to all three of them, "Please leave. Do not come back. This is your only warning before I call the police." They left eventually, but not before Mom left the casserole on my porch with a note about forgiveness and family obligations. I donated the casserole to the homeless shelter down the street. These days, my life is peaceful. I tend to Grandma's roses, which are blooming more beautifully than ever. My career is thriving. I made executive VP last month. I feel good, and it's all thanks to Grandma.